The following is a conversation I had with Richroll here at London Real Studios for his podcast. And I'm a big fan of Rich. He was very helpful for me on the journey I had to my Ironman race and our Iron Mind series. And I've been a huge fan of Rich and his whole journey to become an ultra man athlete in his 40s, and also to fight his own struggles with addiction and alcoholism, and to come out and be really public about it. So I've always had a real soft spot for Rich, and it was a real honor that he came to London, and I got to have him on London Real, and then he asked to interview me. And so we switched places, and I took the guest chair, and Rich went really deep. He really went really deep into my past, and the man I was in my 20s in New York City, and what shaped me into who I am now. And he also went really deep into my addiction and my behavior and how I got over that addiction. So this is a very raw and real conversation that you've never seen before. I've never really talked like this, and I felt comfortable talking with Rich, because he's been there and done that. I mean, Rich spent 100 days in rehab from his alcoholism, and when you're with a soul like that, you just really want to open up and be honest. And, I feel like the truth is so important. That's my default mode now. When I just feel like, what do I do? Just tell the truth. And so here it is, and all of its ugliness and sadness and despair. And also there's a lot of hope here. And you might see that a lot of London Real was born in this time of despair. And what gives me energy now to do everything I do is because of this dark time in my life. And so I hope you enjoy this, or at least get something from it, more importantly, because this is what really happened, and this is who I really was back then. And I hope it means something to you.
Greetings, everybody. My name is Brian Rose. Welcome to London Real. Today, my guest is Richroll. Oh, wait a minute. I am sitting in Brian's chair in the Heralded London Real Studios, and today we're flipping the equation a little bit. I'm going to be interviewing Brian, which I've been looking forward to for a very long time. So thank you for doing this with me today.
My pleasure.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk to you. It's a little bit like Groundhog Day, because you were kind enough to invite me over to your home for dinner a couple nights ago. Then yesterday I did your show, and now today you're doing my show. So this is our third consecutive conversation. But the great thing about it is that they've all been really meaningful conversations. So I feel very connected to you. It's really nice. And usually I like to go into an interview without having had too much interaction with the guest. I know we talked about that the other day, that you prefer that as well. This is not that case, but I think there's plenty to explore with you. And I think what's cool about your story is that although the facts of our respective experiences are very different, I think in the Venn diagram of our lives, there's quite a bit of overlap. And so I relate to a lot of the things that you've kind of gone through and overcome to be in the place that you're at today. And I should say just publicly before we even begin that you've been an inspiration to me for a very long time. You were a thought leader from the get-go, a very early adopter of new media. You really set the standard for high production value visual content in the talk show format from the beginning. And I think everybody's been playing catch up ever since. So it's been many years of me wanting to have this conversation with you. So again, thank you.
No, thank you. Those are some seriously strong words, and so I really appreciate that. I've been a huge fan of what you've been doing, everything, not only with your competition and your books, but also your podcast. And I look to you a lot of times in what you do visually and with audio and your guests. So I'm a big fan. And when we had that Skype conversation, a few months ago, I was a little surprised to hear you say that. And so, yeah, thank you so much. Big honor having you here. And,
cool.
Thanks for putting me in the guest chair.
Yeah, it's going to be good. You've done this occasionally, though. Every once in a while, you sit yourself down opposite the host chair and allow yourself to be explored.
Yeah, I try to do it once a year, but usually it's not with anyone so famous. And so
I don't consider myself that, but okay.
But it's nice not to be in the driver's seat for once, you know. And so
and I had one collared shirt that I brought with me. Unfortunately, if I had a three-piece suit, I would have worn it today, but unfortunately I didn't. I did the best thing that I could, though.
That would be weird.
Yeah, so why don't we begin with I mean, first and foremost, like, I want to talk about the show a little bit before we go into your background. I mean, you began London Real in 2011, and you've done hundreds and hundreds of interviews. There's been some overlap in the guests that I've had and that you've had. I'm interested in you know how this experience of hosting this show, you call yourself a broadcaster, the experience of hosting this show has changed and enriched your life.
Yeah, so our first show, I think, published in October 2011, and I was, 9 months earlier, I was a banker in the City of London, and my job was to, you know, get on phones and talk to the Goldman Sachs and the JP Morgans of the world and move around credit derivatives. That was my specialty, and I'd been doing that for 9 years, and I had just had enough. I realized I wasn't happy, and for the first time in my life, I realized that adding money to my bank account wasn't changing that fact. And I had an observation of myself, and I thought, what are you doing, Brian? And so I literally walked out of there. It was very scary. I walked out of there and didn't know what I was going to do. And but I remember making a conscious decision that I didn't want to like start a tech business and do an IPO, and I didn't want to try to impress my friends with this, now you're a CEO guy. And so I just kind of wandered around and took some time off and didn't know what would be next. But you know, I thought about starting a show, and I'd been a big fan of Joe Rogan, and I'd been watching him. And I remember I had a conversation with my dad, and I said, Dad, you should start a podcast. And he laughed at me. This was probably March 2011.
Did he know what a podcast was?
Probably not. But it was funny. It was a weird way of maybe me getting my head around that. And so I was like, and I thought he'd be perfect because he could have conversations. And not many people probably knew what podcasts were back then. Rogan was still on Vimeo, and I think you could download audio, but you had to be kind of smart about it.
Right.
And so maybe I was just thinking about it, flirting with it, and I was spending a lot of days with nothing to do. And I was hanging out with my Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt instructor, who usually also have nothing to do during the day. And one time I said, hey, we should start a podcast. And then immediately he said, yes. And then I was like, well, I need to worry about what my former bankers would say. And I remember me having resistance if I really wanted to put myself out there. And then finally, I just said, let's do it. And so my first episode was in October. I didn't know what I was gonna do or how I was gonna do it. It ended up just being guys I knew from jiu-jitsu, having cool combos, and I didn't know where it was going to go.
Right.
But if I look back now on myself, I think something inside of me needed to maybe just talk, maybe share myself, maybe push myself. They ended up being almost like therapy sessions, I think, for me online. But that was the genesis of the show. I was always impressed when people put the name London in front of their businesses. So I went to the London School of Sound to take a DJ course. I remember I went to the London Sleep Institute because I couldn't sleep. And I was like, wow, when you put London in front of it, it gives it cred.
Yeah,
so,
some gravitas.
Yeah, and so I thought, let's call the show, remember it was originally London Real Deal, because I thought we'd be talking about the real deal. And then we just truncated it to London Real. Yeah. And so that's what happened.
And you made a decision, like a very conscious decision, to really focus on video as your primary distribution platform as opposed to audio. Like I'm sort of evolving into video, but I started a year after you, but audio native. You made the opposite decision and then created like all this infrastructure that evolved over time around it to, I mean, this studio is insane. Like you've got 20 people working here. I don't know how many cameras are shooting right now. It's quite something. I mean, I called my wife after I did your show the other day, and she said, how did it go? And I said, man, it's like going on Jon Stewart, you know? He's got it dialed in. Like, this is a professional outfit. But it didn't start that way, and I think, you know, there's power in understanding that when you take that leap of faith and you just try when you don't have all the answers, you don't have it all figured out, but you're willing to put yourself out there and perhaps even fail publicly, in order to, create some momentum around something that could grow and build into something more powerful over time.
Yeah, I was terrified to put myself out there publicly. And again, some of the early episodes, I was talking about plant medicines, and I really remember thinking the Bank of England will never let me go back into trading and banking.
If you ever wanted to go back.
Yeah, because like at this point I didn't know, and I was just like, what if you need to go back? And so I was worried about that, but I put my face out there, and I thought my colleagues would make fun of me, and I'm sure they did. But for me, video was important. When I was 10 or 12 years old, my mom, who was a single mother at the time, she got like a bonus being a saleswoman, and she bought us one of those old VHS players that you could hang on your shoulder, and she bought a camera with it. So I used to make videos as a kid on my grandpa's ranch and goofy things, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood knockoffs. And it's also really funny, if you look back at my videos, we also put ads in between the video. So we would make up our own ads between our own shows. This is, of course, an American thing. They would never do that in France. And so I was always a guy that liked video and playing with video. And then I remember I got on YouTube really early, and I uploaded like a video of me riding an elephant on safari like in '07. So I was familiar with the platform. And I just thought, how can you identify with someone unless you see their face? So for me, just throwing out an audio file back then seemed counterintuitive. So from the get-go, we just set up video. I didn't know what I was doing. It was literally webcams and slicing the screen in two pieces. It looks really rough if you look at it now.
Yeah, well, if you go back and look at early episodes of Rogan, it's those streaming cameras were not exactly high def. It's very blurry, and it's very lo-fi. People look at his show now, and it's so dialed in and polished. But he didn't begin that way either.
No, and I'm so glad that we did it. And so for me, the promise was to myself, and then later to everybody else, I'm going to publish one a week. And so now this is like what I teach all my students. It's just like pull the trigger and put something out there, because most of us procrastinate and wait and think of all the reasons. So no matter how bad it looked, we just stuck it up. And when I look at those old episodes, like it's just like no lighting, and my facial hair is shocking and all that stuff. But every one, I just promised to myself I'm going to make it a little bit better.
You had an epic soul patch.
Yeah, right? The soul patch. I mean, I had the G-Star Raw, the boots and all that. But each one we try to make a little better. So I was just like, all right, let's make a little lighting and a little this, and that's how we got to this. And we're still trying to make this better.
Yeah. And when you think back, when you reflect on not just the journey, but all these people that you've had the opportunity to sit down with and talk to, like, what is the biggest kind of takeaway in terms of how that's enriched your own life?
For me, broadcasting it's been the greatest thing I've ever done my whole life. It's been completely life-changing for me, and I don't plan on stopping this until I die. I really don't, because having people in my studio and a real presence every single week, it's just changed my life so much. It's just opened me up to kind of humanity, other people's points of view. It's connected me to humans in a way that up until I was 40, I was always disconnected. I felt really alienated. I felt alone. And that's probably why I behaved the way I did. But this kind of forced me to get out of my shell, and I would be anxious before every episode, and it kind of forced me to connect with people. And what happens is that these people rub off on me. Like there's a little bit of every one of my guests in me, some more. Like some say, well, you dress like one of your guests and you do this like one of your guests. But it really changed me a lot, and it let me finally connect. And I started making other decisions in my life. I started having friends that were actually cool. And then it started, making me connect, with a family and that kind of thing. So it's just changed me so massively, these ideas and these people. And also, every week I just have one goal. I want to present the best version of the guest in the chair, and it's like our gift to you. So again, it was this like selfless act every week. And I had been used to going into the city and trying to rip as much money out of every person and every company and every bank I came in touch with. That's what they taught me on Wall Street. And so it was this change in mentalities, and I really liked it, and it changed who I was. I think your work affects you as a person more than you know. And so for me, doing that every day, I think it got my head in one way. And doing this every day, it makes me to a different person.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's something magical and beautiful and powerful about this idea of transitioning or evolving out of a perspective of trying to approach your professional career from a perspective of what can I get out of this? What am I going to extract? As you said, you know, I'm in it for me. What am I getting out of this? When you flip that equation and you make it about service and giving back, it feels like initially when you're making that switch, like, well, this is weakness or this is some kind of weird surrender. But ultimately, when you step into that, your life expands in such unbelievable ways. Like the enrichment value of me walking the path that I've walked, I could not have ever predicted it. And when you make it about somebody other than yourself and you're in an act of selfless service as this gift, this offering, your life tends to expand in direct proportion to the extent to which you're giving.
Yeah, but that concept was absolutely inconceivable to me as a 40-year-old. I mean, take
that's the arc.
Yeah, it's a crazy arc. And then, I mean, take where I went to school. It was about you, and then the banking thing. It's just, it's the opposite, and it's maybe why you see them vote differently than the artists and the people in the media space. And so for me, it was a first-line education on this whole concept of service, and I didn't even know I was doing that for years. But it was changing me. And I remember every year I would look in the mirror and say, are we going to do this for another year? Because this doesn't feel like it's going anywhere. And then I'd be like, well, wait a second, let's look at you. You're happier, you have better friends, you're smiling, you're doing this, so let's go one more year, and then we're going to have a conversation, and unless this is going somewhere. And I remember, and I think I was feeling the service and changing, and then I think that was coming together, but there was a lot of resistance.
Was there a specific moment where it clicked and you're like, I'm going to do this for the rest of my life? Versus like, I don't know.
Yeah, there definitely was. And to be honest, it happened when we turned this thing into a business. And when we did that, it made me think, oh, it's not going to always be me alone in the studio juggling 20 different balls. And that did happen for three and a half years. And when I finally said, oh, there's a way where we can be of service and offer all this value, and then it can actually run itself, then I was just like, wow, okay, now we can definitely do this. Because I think something inside of me doesn't like the idea of me ever doing this for charity. So it's funny because I never allowed myself to spend any of my personal savings on London Real. It was like rent would be paid by a little tiny bit of advertising revenue, and otherwise I was really disciplined. Because for me it was like it either exists or it doesn't. I'm not going to be somebody that just throws money at their dream and does this. And so I was always really disciplined, and when it showed signs of life, that became my new complex puzzle that I was going to work on. But I knew, okay, now we're going to be able to do this.
Yeah, so applying that spreadsheet finance brain.
And now it had something to latch onto maybe. Before I was really in creation mode, and of course I wanted the show to be bigger and more people to see it, but I didn't know we could do this. And so that's probably what I've been working on the last 3 or 4 years, and probably I'll be working on until I die, because that's just as complicated. But that was when I think, but for 3 years earlier, I had that conversation looking in the mirror. I remember I was in New York City for New Year's Eve, probably in year 2, and I remember I looked at myself in the mirror. I'm like, what are you doing, Brian? Like, seriously, you got to pull the plug on this? You got to go, I don't know, who's going to hire you now? The city maybe doesn't want you anymore. You got to go do this. But look at all these other things. You've moved in with your family. You got this, you got that. You're in good shape. And so I always said 1 more year. And that was that conversation.
Yeah, and you were able to really establish yourself early on when YouTube was blowing up and really create, something of weight and value. And now we're in a moment where there's never been more discussion or attention paid to new media outlets like what you're doing. So when you sort of canvas what's happening across these various channels of new media and how they're influencing culture in a way that even a couple years ago, I don't think people really understood. Does that change how you think about what you do, or how do you think about like this space that we're both in?
It's funny, when I first started, again, I was kind of in this old competitive mindset, and I remember the new media space, and probably even led by kind of Joe Rogan in a certain extent, was there's room for everybody. And so I remember I called it, almost as a joke, Peace and Love in London Real. And I would always say, we always say, yes, we want to help you promote. We never go out and try to do a land grab. If BBC wants to come over to my studio and interview someone, I say yes. Whereas the banker Brian would say no. And so I always intended to err toward the more the merrier. And we all can make the world a better place. And so I always felt that way. And I still look at it that way.
Yeah.
I never feel like anyone's hurting or competing when it comes to our space. I don't look at it that way. And it's amazing to see what's happened. You know, again, even back to Rogan, looking at someone that has this independent kind of single person-ish platform, and now how it's leading the conversations.
Yeah, it's extraordinary. It's as if technology has advanced now to the point where the experience of connecting with new media has become seamless enough that mainstream audiences can access it in a way that you had to be a little bit more intentional about it a couple of years ago, because you know, we didn't have 4G, and like you couldn't really stream video on your phone, and all of these sort of things that have now been resolved to the point where it's available and it's just, it's ubiquitous, right? And so that creates the foundation for somebody like Joe Rogan to become who he is. I mean, that show, we were talking about this the other day, like I think that he is the most influential media figure, particularly with young males or males aged, you know, I don't know, 16 or 18 to 30 or 35. And I'm not certain that mainstream media is conscious or appreciative of the extent to which he's influencing minds across the world. And I think it's an important lesson for all of us who are in this world to understand that this is only going to grow and become more impactful culturally.
Yeah, and you see it when the mainstream channels started putting things on YouTube and the social networks.
Yeah.
And you saw that shift a couple of years ago, where I think when the Late Show with Stephen Colbert, they spent 3 months shooting YouTube clips before they actually launched. So like they're seeing that you have to be on this platform. And again, credit should be given to YouTube to a huge extent, because this platform is there, and the 4G, it now allows it to be just as relevant and downloadable as anything else. I mean, when we started, we couldn't have started even 5 years earlier because there wasn't the tech ready. Yeah. But now it's not like the second wave, but it's another big wave where, yeah, I mean, Joe Rogan is this massive brand. Now, does the mainstream media know about him? Will they ever know? Will it change their model? Can they replicate him? Probably no on all of that stuff.
No, because it's him.
Yeah.
It's the Joe Rogan experience, right? We were talking about that.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I'm just so grateful to, you know, have a little bit of a voice in what's happening, and it's just been a cool experience that, like yourself, has enriched me in just innumerable ways. And when I think about the impact of all the guests that I've had on, it's not like, oh, there's, you know, from this person I took this, and from this person I took this. It's like this soup, you know, that just kind of resides in my collective unconscious that I think influences me in ways that I'm not even aware of, you know, to improve my life.
Yeah, for me, I'm getting like a PhD. Yeah. And every week I get a new lecturer that comes in and physically tells me all of their IP, downloads in their brain, and makes an impression on me. And so, I mean, I have the best seat in the house. And then on top of that, I also get to broadcast it, and other people get to watch it. But I also feel like I'm in this university here, and I get all of these, and they affect me so much. And I have literally mentors out there, whether it's John Joseph or Dan Pena or Ido Portal or Dorian Yates. I mean, I really watch these men behave, and they affect all of my decisions. So yeah, it's incredible. And we're building, I guess, our own brand, if you call it that. I don't like that word, but you know, we are building this person, this ethos that we are, and that's just going to extend as things go forward. Yeah. And so it's interesting to see it kind of hatch. Right. It's also interesting for me to see that more people come on with podcasts and more people come on with shows where they're talking to people, but maybe because of that initial feeling, I never feel like land grab or competitive. No. Whenever I feel that way, I always force myself to go the opposite way. So like I'll have on anybody on this show that run other shows and all that stuff. And it's this theory of abundance that a lot of people talk about, harder to practice, but it's really true out there. And that everyone can have their own micro niche and their own group of people, and there's an overlap here and there. And what a beautiful concept that is. And we still don't know what YouTube is. I always say that. We don't know what it is yet. It's this weird new piece of tech that was thrown in the monkey clan, and we're still poking it and prodding it. And in the next 10, 20, 30 years, it will become really weird things. I mean, look what cinema did. Now this is kind of 10x that. And we're going to see it do these weird things, and we don't know yet. So yeah, we're in a weird, awkward adolescence period with all of this, you know. And we're also the first generation who knows what it's like to live without computers and the internet and smartphone. You know, there's not going to be another generation after us
who didn't grow up with these things. And we saw YouTube go from cat videos to what it is now, and it's only going to continue to mature. And you're already seeing the onboarding of, you know, unbelievably talented young people who are taking this medium and creating brand new sort of content that we couldn't have ever imagined even a couple of years ago. And I think that's only going to continue to escalate and accelerate.
Yeah, the famous quote, "The medium is the message," and I don't always completely agree, but it's changed everything.
Yeah.
Know? And you know, even with us, we were making documentary movies last year. And this year we turned it into a 10-part video series because it's like, you got to do that. Why not do that? It's this whole weird component. What will the future bring? Like everyone else's different iteration and take on this. It's exciting.
Yeah. Well, the 10-part docu-series was Iron Mind, and it features John Joseph, our mutual friend, who's had a huge impact on my life and has become one of my best friends, and I know now you're close with him, and I want to talk about that a little bit, but that's what kind of brought you back into my sort of the forefront of my awareness, because I'd been following you for a long time from the beginning, but then I was like, oh man, another episode of Iron Mind. Like I was riveted on following your journey, and it was really cool. So we're going to get into that, but I want to go back to the beginning and kind of trace your origin story a little bit, because there's a lot of, again, like a lot of overlap with my story, but also a lot of interesting things to explore there. So you grew up San Diego, smart kid, engineer mind, dad's Caltech, super brain guy, right?
Yeah, correct.
And so, you know, talk to me about, you know, growing up in that environment and kind of ultimately what led you to MIT.
So yeah, born in the 70s, 71, and grew up in San Diego. Back then it was a smaller town, probably known as a naval port, a little bit of tech happening there. But my mom and dad are from Arizona. They come from families, my dad's owned a farm. My mom's dad was a rancher, a cattle rancher. So, you know, real kind of salt of the earth folks, you know, but they're both entrepreneurial in their own minds. They both, you know, created their own farms and their own ranches. And so I used to go there and visit. And I remember asking my dad when we first went to Caltech, he got D's in math. And I was like, because he had come from a small town, he was a whiz. And I was like, Dad, did you ever quit? And he said, on a farm, you can't quit. If you quit, you die. And so I think all of that was kind of put on me as a kid that, you know, when a farmer, you just get these things done because that is your life. And so I had this great kind of upbringing of grandparents that was just no nonsense, got their work done, led by example. And so my parents came out to San Diego, but they definitely had this kind of a, you know, farm, ranch, Arizona upbringing of, you know, just kind of good values and no nonsense. My mom and dad, I think, dated each other in high school and then got married. Dad was super smart, Caltech grad, and was right into kind of that early semiconductor industry there. Used to work a lot. And so I grew up there, you know, in San Diego where everything's sunny and great. You know, the big event for me was when I was 7, they got divorced. And it's funny, when I have kids now, you know, there are going to be events in their lives that they're going to take one way or the other. And at the time, it was hard for me as a 7-year-old. I think I was always kind of a self-reliant kid. But when that happened, I think part of my brain locked in and said, okay, humans cannot be trusted to be around and not necessarily love you forever. And you're going to be on your own in this life, and you better kind of get used to that. And so even though there was no yelling, there was no beatings, there was no drinking in that house, that's the flip, the switch that happened in my brain. And my 2-year-old brother and my sister that was 4 years younger, they all had different reactions. But my reaction was, okay, you better make sure you kind of do this on your own. And I think I started building up barriers around me that kept me from being a father until I was in my 40s. And so, yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, what was that like? Like isolating?
Yeah, it was
just self-reliance.
Yeah, Dad's not there, and you kind of better get on with it. And so I think I just set that up. Science I loved, and math and computer programming, and so I went really big into that. I was a real dorky, nerdy science kid. I lived on a suburban block where, you know, the most exciting thing happened all year was Halloween. It was really, and I actually, I'm so glad I had that upbringing. You know, there was no craziness or drama or madness. Great mother, you know, raised 3 kids on her own, and she decided when she was divorced she was going to be the super mom of the decade. So it was like reading books and taking you on trips to Europe. And I fought with her a lot. I think I let all my anger vent on her, but she just did a really good job of just raising us up really well.
So you grew up with your mom basically, or did you go back and forth?
I went back and forth. I spent a couple years with my dad when she would kind of throw me out, and that was great. And I have a great relationship with my dad, and always led by example, and super great and super strong, both just amazing people. But I kind of bounced around and then kind of became a teenager and got my first car and did all that. And
you were like a gearhead, right? Like always wrenching on cars.
Yeah, I bought my first car in 1968 Ford Mustang for $1,200.
What color?
It was originally blue with a vinyl white top, but that didn't.
The midnight blue, that dark blue.
I think it was a dark blue, yeah. But that didn't last long. I ripped the vinyl off, and I ended up taking an auto body course at night at a community college. This is when I was doing all my AP chemistry and physics during the day, and I would literally sand and spray. I did the whole car up as an auto body, and then I would work on that car until my fingernails were black, and my stepmother would ask me to wash my hands at dinner. And so I got really into that. I ended up moving with my dad when I was 17, and I went from a computer geeky math science magnet school down in the segregated area of San Diego. It was like 90% black and Hispanic, and they bust in the white kids to do this. And so I had a really cool upbringing around all sorts of different types of people. But when I was 17, Torrey Pines High School, it was like Beverly Hills 90210.
Yeah.
Kids would literally roll up in their own Mercedes-Benz. I was like, what? And they had cheerleaders, what? And a football team. And so I got a quick introduction into what a high school might be like.
Yeah.
And then I was off to college.
But so academic engineer, but also practical engineer, wrenching on cars, but not an athlete. Didn't play sports?
I actually wrestled 1 year in high school because the other kid in high school who nobody would talked to me. Right. and so he said, you got to do this wrestling thing. And I was like, okay. So I wrestled, and I went from this really skinny kid to like kind of big because the wrestling practices were just nightmares. And I didn't know that. So I wrestled 1 year. I lost every single match, I think, but it gave me something physical to do. But otherwise, it was all about grades for me and working on my car. And then I kind of discovered girls a bit.
So you must have graduated top of your class to get into MIT.
Yeah, I mean, I grades were important for me, and I would engineer it in until I got it done. And I was constantly taking the AP classes, and I wanted to get into a good school.
And so that drive, I mean, this is part and parcel of who you are. Like, where does that come from? Is that driven by parental expectations and parental rearing, or is that just baked into you? Like, there's an intensity and a focus and a level of obsessiveness that I think sort of has been part of your motor and also part of what might have led you astray at times, but I think it's certainly who you are.
Yeah, I think it's baked in somehow because I remember my mom trying to give me $20 for an A when I was in ninth grade, and I would literally refuse her money. It's like, I'm not doing it for you. So for me, and it depends how deep you want to go in this, but for me, it's never good enough. And so for me, I'm never impressed with my efforts. I always think I can do more. And so I'm always competing with myself. And that can be good, quote unquote, if you want to, engineer goals and things like that. It can also mean that I constantly probably have a dialogue going in my head that's saying, we can do better, we can do better.
Yeah.
But
I have no idea what you're talking about.
Okay, exactly. So yeah, I think that's there, and that later probably led to other types of behaviors. But yeah, I definitely wanted to kind of get there and push it, and I just wanted to get some, probably is the way of looking at that. And I didn't really care what my parents thought. They never really put the pressure. They had great degrees, and my brother ended up going to Stanford and all that, but it was no one ever had to tell me to do that.
When was your brother at Stanford?
So he would have been there, he would have started, I guess, in '87, I think.
He's 2 years behind me. What's his name?
Eric Rose.
Eric Rose.
Computer science. Yeah.
I don't think I knew him.
Yeah, I actually didn't get into Stanford and didn't want to go, and he didn't get into MIT, so that was like our thing. But I wanted to get as far away from California as possible.
Right.
But yeah, I don't know with that drive. It's just something that's always been in me, and it's funny, I watch my boys now, and I'm just watching them to see, is that in them, you know? But there's something innate in me about just, going for it.
It's huge. You know, I think when you're born with that kind of motor, that's as important as any education that you're going to get. Like if you have a drive, an ability to focus, an ability to lock in on something that you care about and work towards that. I mean, I don't know that that can be taught, really. I mean, it can be pressured upon somebody, but it's really a gift, you know. So whether your children have it or not, I don't know how much there is you can do as a parent to instill that in them, other than lead by example. But they come out kind of how they are, you know. And you have 2 young children, so you're in the midst of, you know, like figuring all that stuff out.
Yeah, I'm watching their personalities now, and they're very different. And my youngest, Caden, he really does what he wants to do, and I just think it's a beautiful thing. And so it'll just be interesting just for me to watch them kind of evolve. And leading by example is something I've really now learned from my grandparents and parents, what they did. So, and it's what I do every day now, here on camera and off camera, and I'm always really conscious of that. So that definitely helped me, but there was something going on inside me, and still is.
Yeah.
And it's probably gotten even bigger in the last few years, because I think I've become more focused and knowing myself a little more.
We're going to get into that. But right now you're at MIT.
Yeah, so MIT.
That had to be intense.
I mean, so for me, I mean, it's funny because I was reading your book recently, and, you know, the applying for college thing in America, it's a big deal, you know, and if you're not in America, the SAT scores and the grades and the grade point average and how many AP courses and am I doing enough volunteer work? I mean, getting into college is a big deal. And I remember my dad went to Caltech, and I went up there, and it couldn't have bored me any more than that. It's like 10% women, they're super science guys, some of the smartest people in the world, but there's not a lot of socializing going on. And I was just like, also it was in California, so I didn't really want to go there. I visited Cornell, I visited MIT, and I visited UPenn with my mom. She took me to these places, and I applied to the UC schools in Stanford. And I remember I went to Cornell, it was in the middle of nowhere, and I was like, okay, it seems all right. I went to UPenn, one of my guys took me to a fraternity party and got me drunk. And then I went to MIT, and I was in this urban environment. There was a guy singing in a subway, I remember, like a busker or a performer. And I was like, wow, this is cool. And MIT had this great reputation, and I knew I wanted to do something technical. And so when I got in, it was a big day for me. And it was probably the furthest away I could get from San Diego, like a 5.5-hour flight. So for me, it was a no-brainer. And I went for it. And I was excited.
I did the opposite. I was like, I grew up on the East Coast, and I was like, I need to get, you know, I want to go far away, and ended up in California.
Yeah, and in your book, when you describe California, I could see if you're from the East Coast, you get there and you're like, what? Everyone's hanging out in the sandals and they're cool and all that. For me,
it blew my mind.
For me, it was still so much like San Diego. I was just like, I don't get it. But at MIT, you got these, you know, neoclassic buildings with these domes and these columns, and you walk down the hallways, and there's some dude that created, like, I don't know, this, you know, the calorie measurement and like all these things. And I used to walk into that it's called Lobby 7. It's on Massachusetts Avenue, and you walk in, it's this big dome building. And I used to stare up at the top of the dome every time I walked in for 4 years, and I'd be like, wow, I can't believe I'm here. And I felt that for 4 years, and I can get jaded quick. But it was a very special place to be.
Right. And you ended up interning at Ford, right? So the idea was you were going to be like a mechanical engineer?
Well, I got to MIT, and, you know, obviously there's not a lot of humanities there, and so you kind of have to choose your major very quickly. And it's either pure science or engineering, or you could be electrical engineering and computer science, which is one of the hardest things to do there. And my brother was the programmer, my dad was the electrical engineer. My dad tried he tried so hard to explain how a transistor worked, and I could never get it. And I could code okay, but the truth is my brother and my dad are much smarter than I am. They get that stuff in their DNA. For me, I can work hard, I'm fairly smart, but when it gets into like the details, I knew it wasn't me. And so mechanical engineering was like, again, cars and practical stuff. I didn't want to do pure physics, it seemed too boring. So that was an obvious choice for me for major. So I chose that. You know, also moved into fraternity within the first 4 days of me getting there, but that's a whole nother story. But yeah, interned at Ford Motor Company when I was 19 years old. You couldn't have met a happier kid in all of America.
Right.
Because I was there at Ford Motor Company, I had a Ford Motor Company jacket. I worked on the Mustang. I was going to all these plants and assembly plants. They were pouring engine blocks, and I got to drive around in all the new cars, and it was amazing. But I also saw 50-year-old guys that were there making $40-something thousand a year that were dying at the company, and I noted to myself, I don't want to be one of them. Mm-hmm. So on one hand, it was amazing and great experience. On the other hand, I realized that's not going to be enough for me.
Right. So the birth of your intrigue around Wall Street and finance was born.
Yeah. Well, I had always been kind of the kid that did the lemonade stand. And I had always been the kid that went to Price Club back then, which was a discount place where you could buy literally boxes and boxes of stuff. And I would sell the candy on the bus, and I would calculate my profit margins. And my grandpa Benedict, my mother's father, was a horse trader and a cattleman, and he was a business guy. And we used to cut deals. He gave me 10% of one of his race horses one time, and you know, we used to do business. And so I was always kind of a little bit of a business guy, but they didn't teach business at my school, so I went on to engineering. But I always found it interesting.
You had the hustle.
Yeah, maybe I had a little hustle, and I just found it interesting. So as soon as I got the whiff of finance, Wall Street, started watching the movie Wall Street and Gordon Gekko, that started happening around junior year. I was like, wow, this looks really interesting.
Yeah, because we're at the age when Wall Street came out, it was like the boom era, and this movie, which was intended to be this cautionary tale around greed, ended up being like an inspirational movie for all of these, you know, go-getting, finance, Wall Street, aspirational young people.
Yeah, and Michael, when they interview Michael Douglas,
this perversion of the movie, you know?
Yeah, and they interview Michael Douglas, and he said, people come up to me and they were like, I loved you in the movie. He's like, no.
I'm the villain.
I'm the bad guy. Don't do what I did. Can't you see? And they're like, no. So yeah, that movie was epic. I used to watch it a lot. And like you said, it was kind of what not to do. But it was such a well-made movie. I think it won Best Picture that year. Well-written movie. Even to this day, that movie teaches me things. And it's very accurate about what happens there. I was kind of seduced with that.
Right. So how do you make that transition then? How do you end up?
So great question. First of all, I started getting the Wall Street Journal delivered to my fraternity front door as a junior.
You were that guy.
I was that guy. And this is back when I had no pictures.
Were you dressing like this?
No, I didn't dress like this. This took a long time. I didn't even dress like this as a banker. That's the crazy thing, and that's another story. But I used to get the Wall Street Journal before it was owned by Rupert Murdoch, before there were pictures. It was just that. And the beautiful thing of MIT is there's the Sloan School of Business that's right there. And so it's an amazing, management school, but they allowed undergrads to take courses there. Unlike Harvard. Harvard Business School would never let the undergrads in. Right. And as far as I know, very few would. And so I went over and started taking classes about options and about finance. And I would crush these people there because they were like 27. They probably went to Harvard undergrad. They had gone to Wall Street, and they were coming back to get their finance degree. And they were teaching options pricing theory with like vector calculus. And I was just like, yeah, get some. I got this. And I would beat them in the classes. And so I was learning this knowledge, getting excited. And I was like, wow, this is fun and exciting. And so I kind of started swaying.
Right. And so was the allure the challenge of it, the lifestyle, the money? Like, what was it that attracted you to the world?
That's a really good question. I found it really practical. That's what I liked about like options pricing and theory, is it wasn't just, oh, let's go study this theory of thermodynamics. It's like, this is actually working every single day, and people are buying, selling companies, and there's stock prices for this. So in some ways, it was an engineer's dream because it's real. The application's real. But also, maybe for me, it was new to me, and it looked exciting, and it also looked, I guess, powerful. And I thought I wanted to make a lot of money. I mean, I'm in America. The American dream is you make all the money and everything's okay. So I'm sure I thought of that, but I had no concept of how much money you can make when you're in high school. I mean, in college. I remember even asking people, like, what are you supposed to make when you get there? I mean, I didn't even know. But for me, it was exciting, so much upside. And the more I talked about it and thought about it, it just seemed like something I wanted to go just try, be a part of. And it's the hottest thing then. I always used to say, like one of my guests in here, if it was the 80s, it was oil, and then it was Wall Street, and later it would be the dot-com boom, and now it's something else. There's always something every decade, but it seems like the hot thing, and that was
Yeah,
hot
now
for
it's
me.
being a startup entrepreneur.
Yeah,
you know,
or new media, maybe.
right, or new media,
maybe,
exactly. But yeah, at that period of time, I think people don't realize like there was a huge, you know, the gestalt was pushing people towards Wall Street as the romantic career choice.
Yeah, and they came to MIT and recruited to find people just like me that could go there and use my engineering skills to help them build, you know, models and derivatives and stuff. So.
Right. So you had a choice. You got into the business school, right? But you also got an opportunity to become a trader, and you chose the latter.
Yeah, I got into business school, which was a big deal for me, and you could have gone one more year, and I could have got an MBA as well. But honestly, the guys at the business school, I thought they were really boring, and like I just thought it was just not that cool to hang out with them. And then another year of just studying like accounting versus going to Wall Street and being either an investment banker or a trader. And so maybe I was a little restless, and I was just like, let's go. So yeah, I got that option, and I got to move to New York City at 22 years old.
Right.
And I got to start trading a company called Bankers Trust.
And what year was that?
So that would have been 93. Yeah.
I was around then.
You were around then?
Yeah. Well, I was in law school at that time up at Cornell, but I would come down to the city all the time to party.
Okay.
Yeah, so
okay,
maybe we bumped into each other. I don't know.
We did. I'm sure I bumped into John Joseph back then.
Yeah,
too.
probably.
I used to live in the East Village.
So you lived in the East Village. Yeah. Did you live there initially? Is that where you first moved?
Yeah, so moved there in 93, drove from Boston, and something about the East Village excited me. You know, again, being in that urban environment, a lot of my colleagues were going to the Upper East Side and the Upper West Side, which looks so boring to me. I guess I've always been attracted to some grit. Or something like that, and so.
Well, downtown is that's where all the energy is. That's where all the excitement and
it's true, right?
The allure of the unknown.
Yeah,
like it was an interesting time to be there.
Definitely, and I think that's the story of New York. I mean, that's why John was hanging out with Madonna and all these Wall Street bankers too. They would come down there because that's where the edge, the fun, the excitement was. And so I looked at some places to be. I mean, walking to Manhattan. I mean, it was just crazy. It was just a crazy dream. I remember being so happy to see policemen on the corner of like St. Mark's because it was hectic back then. I remember not going down to Avenue A or B, like when John tells those stories, like you really didn't go down there. But I found a place. There was an NYU grad who wanted a roommate. He was in a band, and I moved in there right in the East Village. It was like 2nd Ave and 10th Street.
Right.
And there I was studying for my Series 7 exam, hanging out for like a few weeks, waiting to start my job in the summer in New York City, and it was amazing, intense, and I felt great.
Yeah. What is the reality of that life on Wall Street versus what you see in the movie Wall Street, or what you see kind of through the Hollywood lens?
Yeah, that's a good question. First of all, there's many choices you can make when you go there, and I kind of knew them and kind of didn't. And so the two that I had, one was trading, where you actually kind of are making real-time, quick decisions every day about what to kind of buy and sell to make money for people. The other was investment banking and advisory, where you advise companies to buy other companies. And I remember I had an offer from Morgan Stanley, and I remember two of the guys called me at like 10 o'clock at night, and they're like, yeah, we just ordered dinner, and we're going to work on a big deal all night. And I was just like, that doesn't sound cool. And so
that was I had 3 roommates, and they were all Morgan Stanley analysts.
Okay,
and that's what they were doing.
And they worked crazy hours and weekends, and they put together pitch books. And so that's another side. I'm glad I didn't go that side.
But you're the John C. McGinley and Charlie Sheen, Bud Fox on that like long row of computer screens yelling on the phone.
A little bit like that. And so I remember going to Bankers Trust for my interviews, and like I remember going to interviews to fly you in from Boston, they pay for your plane ticket, going into New York City past the big graveyard by the airport, and you get into these buildings, and I had some intense interviews. But at Bankers Trust, they sat me down and firing questions at me. How many gas stations in America? I don't know. Well, how would you figure it out? Tell me. And then trying to get your brain to work and see how it works. And I can see the Statue of Liberty over here, and huge trading floor, 300 people. Everyone's got a meter, desks of space. You can hear everybody, see everybody. It's all about information transfer before there was an internet. And so testosterone, high environment, people buying and selling different things all day, foreign exchange, government bonds, et cetera. And so I saw it, and I was like, wow, this is the place to be. And so I remember they sat me down the first day, and they said, here's your phone. It was these 2 black phones that go into a board with like 100 dials on it. You can click here and talk to Chicago and here and buy here. And they said, here's a phone to Chicago Board of Trade. Here's a phone to Chicago Mercantile Exchange. You press this button, you can buy and sell government bonds. good luck. And I was just like, I'm 22 years old.
Right.
And I was at a place where they just let you go ahead and just fail. And it was just super exciting. Again, high testosterone environment, a lot of people swearing, intimidating each other. I mean, the guy that used to run my group would just tell people, I'm gonna piss in your fucking skull if you don't. Like, it's just really intense stuff that probably nowadays doesn't go on. But back then it was a lot about bravado, you know, trying to make a big noise, trying to be the biggest trader, taking lots of risks, making and losing lots of money. And so that's what that was like for me. A little bit like Bud Fox, but maybe even a little more intense.
Yeah, so adrenaline, a lot of alpha energy, competitive, and work hard, play hard. So where does the play hard part start to creep in?
Good question. So I started playing hard, you know, the day I moved into my fraternity house at MIT. And so at MIT, there's a weird thing where usually there's a rush and you go see the fraternity houses and then you choose to move in like a year later. When I started at MIT, the fraternities were responsible for like 50% of the male housing. So they had this weird process where you rush over 3 days when you first get there. You literally get there and they load you onto flatbed trucks and you go around to these fraternities, and by Sunday night they say, do you want to come here? And you move in as a pledge. It's a system that I don't even think is in place anymore. And so I did that and moved into a group of 50 dudes, average age 20, maximum age 22. We ran it ourselves, fed ourselves, clean kind of, and did whatever we want, which meant did a lot of drinking as well. And so that's kind of when I started doing my regular drinking, was with this situation with a lot of these guys. And so for me, it was just like, wow. And I've never been around so many guys before. I learned how to behave correctly very quick. I learned a lot about, you know, how you behave around men, what you do, what the protocol is, you know, and so that was a big education for me. I loved it. I also ended up hating it by the end. I stayed there for all 4 years. But it also put together this definitely regular drinking culture, which I was totally fine with. For me, it was a perfect release. And I would go study till 3 in the morning in the library, come home, and always have a beer before I went to sleep. And then I would get up and study again. And I did study hard in school, and they beat us pretty hard at MIT. And I wanted the grades because the GPA would get me the job on Wall Street. And so I did that. So.
And then what does it look like in New York?
So yeah, in New York, you know, probably more of the same. I did a lot of my partying in the East Village with my roommates and with some other Wall Street buddies. And sometimes you would be taken out by brokers and things like that, but they would usually take you to the Spark Steakhouse, and I never seen wine glasses so big, or they'd take you to Score Strip Club where they would give you these funny dollars and you're like, what am I doing here? That was like their thing. But I started partying with my roommates in the East Village, and then a few Wall Street guys as well, investment banker guys. And so,
was it just drinking, or, I mean, there was a lot of Coke going around those days.
You know, in those days, I was just drinking. For some reason, at that time, I think if you wanted to move to another bank, I think a drug test was fairly standard. And I don't know if this was my way of keeping myself in line or not, but I just did a lot of drinking back then. And I didn't see the Coke as much, maybe because I wasn't hanging out with my colleagues as much. I don't think I was cool enough then. I was just this junior scrub on the desk who lived in the East Village. So I didn't see that whole kind of Bud Fox crowd. If I'd stayed there maybe longer, I would have, but I was there at that time for a couple of years. And so for me, you know, I was drinking, hadn't really got completely out of control yet, but, you know, it was starting.
So you're young, you're in New York, you're having a good time, you're partying, but it's not out of control, you're making some bank. Like, life is good, right?
Yeah, life is good. You know, I mean, look, there's no other better place to be in the world. I feel like I wasn't missing out. You know, you're in New York City, you're experiencing these things, you're doing these things. And I did start hanging out with a couple friends that were in Wall Street, and we just, you know, we started doing crazy things. You know, we would spend money we didn't have. We would buy bottles of Cristal, even though we couldn't afford them. And you know, we used to call it the double Cristal hangover, where we wake up the next day and I can't believe I bought $500 worth of champagne when I can't pay my rent. And so we got into this whole excess lifestyle of pretending we were geckos even though we weren't geckos. And and doing this whole thing. And so that started kind of happening.
Yeah, it starts early and that stays with you, right? It doesn't matter how much money you're making. You're always spending more than you have, right? And that, I think, keeps people in that world even when, you know, the fulfillment factor starts to disintegrate.
Yeah, and in New York City, you can always spend more money. I mean, that's the thing. You can, and later I moved to Chicago, and a buddy of mine would visit me, and he said, you know, you can kind of own Chicago. You can't own New York City because there's always an excess. And I remember when I got a job in New York as in a .com startup, and I was being paid $175,000, and I called my buddy up and I said, yeah, I'm thinking about writing a book for like backpackers, like how to survive in New York for $175,000 because I can't, right? And so I was spending it all.
It's insane.
Yeah, I was spending it all, and literally I was broke all the time, and I was 20 something. So that's the mentality of that city, and then the people, and you know, in a weird way, I kind of thank myself for it now because we were always overextending, and we always knew or thought we would make it. So for us, it was just a matter of time.
Doesn't matter, right.
And I'm sure a lot of people that goes wrong, but for me at the time, especially with the weird guys I was hanging out with, we were just like, oh, it's just a matter of time until we make. Because we were around guys that were making $10 million a year. They were like 2 desks away. So for us, we're going to get there. Now, getting there probably doesn't mean you're partying all night and doing all these other things. You have to have some type of game.
Right.
But at the time, we were going for that. And over time, the behavior would get worse and worse.
Right, of course.
Yeah.
It's always going to progress. Did you watch this season of Billions?
I haven't.
You seem like a guy who would watch that show.
I haven't watched Billions. Maybe
you should watch it.
I should watch. Yeah,
I
have a hard time watching sometimes those shows. Like I didn't like The Wolf of Wall Street. I didn't like watching it because it didn't accurately represent the world I was in. And it is a different world. He was trading penny stocks and selling them. But sometimes I like to see those movies and I can't relate because I know kind of the real version. But maybe
Billions
I'll watch
is very
this.
well done, though, and it's the hedge fund world, so it is a little bit different from
world.
your experience. But it's quite compelling. The characters are really engaging, and there's one scene, spoiler alert, in season 2, where Axe, who's like the alpha hedge fund guy, is having a conversation with another hedge fund guy who's like a competitor, you know, not in his firm, in a different firm, who's kind of down on his luck, who's having a bad run. And they're having a conversation about like where he's at with his finances. And the guy he's like, I only have 40 million right now. And it's a whole conversation about like, well, you can't live on 40, you know? And you're listening to this and you're like, yeah, there's no way you can live on. He's like, you got this, you got this, you got this, you got this. It's like 40's not gonna work. And they're like, yeah, I can't do it on 40, you know? And you're like, yeah, you can't do it on 40. And then you're like, wait a minute, that is bananas, right? But it's just about the perspective. Like when you're living that life and you're in that world, you're seeing a very warped view of what it takes to live and thrive and be happy and survive. Like the perspective is just off kilter.
Yeah, it's very warped and it happens really fast. And pretty soon you have to have the private jet, and then the 3 nannies have to come with you, and you have to have the place in the Hamptons and the this and the that.
Yeah, 40's not going to work for that.
No, 40 won't work for that. And so it doesn't work. And so you can kind of get into there. And it's never enough at some point. And so you get into that kind of lifestyle.
Right. I want to kind of drill down on that time in New York when you had gone to Chicago, you were back in New York, you kind of flipped around from a couple different jobs in different Wall Street capacities, but ultimately you end up as CFO of this startup in New York in 2001, right? And then I think that's a very pivotal moment in your life. There were a series of events that occurred that really kind of set in motion everything that's kind of led you to this point.
Yeah, very much so. And so, I had, done banking in a few different places. I'd gone to Chicago, then I'd come to London for a couple of years, and I had actually gone back. I was always trying to, get that break in my career. When I look back now, I didn't deserve a break because I was kind of a mess myself, but I was always looking to make that first $1 million payday or whatever it was, and it wasn't happening, and all of a sudden I had this incredible opportunity to be the .com CFO. Was like in 99, I think, when I actually went back, or 2000.
And this is the first wave of like .com mania.
I mean, it was crazy. It was my best friend from MIT, worked for Bruce Wasserstein. It was a huge investment banker at the time.
Yeah.
And they had just bought some guy's company as a CEO, and they had sacked him. And he was this really well-known guy in the Hamptons, had tons of wealthy friends, and he had just raised $15 million to start a company called LuxuryFinder.com. And he got a article in the New York Times, and he was there, and he was like, I'm going to let you buy a jet online. This is like in '99, right? Before anybody was doing it. And I got introduced to him when I was 27, and he said, okay, you want to be my CFO? If you're as smart as this guy, you can be my CFO. And I was like, yeah, I can do that. No idea what I was doing. So I moved back to New York, and I had a girlfriend there at the time who I'd been seeing in London. And I got kind of into some bad habits there. I'm about to, I'm getting a little bit older, kind of late 20s. And at that point, the drinking had gone more, because it kind of always goes one way. So
what is more?
What is more? So I was always priding myself as the functional alcoholic, right? So drinking every night was something I basically had done since I was got to be 18 or 20. That was just kind of standard for me. People said, do you drink alone? And it's like, well, I live alone. So for me, and I think for me, it's the one time of the day I could just take a break from me, maybe, or from everything else, and have my solitude and my quiet.
And was that a beer or two, or was that a 6-pack or a bottle of wine, or what? I mean, what did that look like?
That was a 6-pack, of course. I mean, at fraternity, that was standard. 6-pack, of course, maybe a 12-pack, maybe at least a couple bottles of wine.
Right.
So at this point, it's looking like that.
Yeah, it's right. Okay.
Yeah, and not drinking during the day, not drinking in the morning. It's not gone that level yet. And again, like part of me is like the ultra professional, and I was smoking cigarettes then, but I'd never smoked during the day because that's not what a professional does. So some weird mind blocks, there.
Well, yeah, you create all these rules to convince yourself that what you're doing is okay.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Talk about telling.
If I go for a run, then I don't have a problem. Like if I can wake up and go exercise before I go to work, it doesn't matter how much I drink at night or whatever. It doesn't matter what the rule is. They're all erected to prop up this, this falsehood.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And you can find any success to justify that you're functional and everything's fine. I show up at work on time, or I got this deal, or something like that. So, so I go back at this incredible opportunity as a .com CFO. Also, go right back into my buddies from New York, right? And they've elevated their game. I was in London for a couple of years, and now they've elevated their party game pretty good. And so, and it's at that time I'm like this .com CFO that now drugs really become an option, and before that, not as much really an option to do that. I was more like, I do everything but that. And for me, that was a dangerous place to go. So again, on one hand, living this idyllic life, amazing job, all this crazy stuff happening. I don't really know what I'm doing, but that's okay. Got a great girlfriend. And at the same time, I'm experimenting with these drugs, and they're starting to have an effect on me that I don't understand.
So walk me through like how you cross that line. Like how does that first happen?
Yeah, so again, I'm hanging out with these kind of Wall Street guys, and of course, since they're in the business, I guess the cocaine is kind of the go-to drug. So we would go out any night of the week, maybe every night of the week. And I remember when I think I got back from London to New York, and I went out with one of my buddies 27 nights in a row. And it wasn't like we were going for a record. It just happened. So I was like, what are you doing tonight? We're meeting for drinks. That's what you do in New York City, right? And so, we're not going to do anything else. We're just going to have some drinks and go home, because that's how it starts. And then the drinks turn into
there's like
something.
A bravado that goes with that. Like,
Yeah.
Here we are, we're doing it again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then it's
like, not only can I show up at work and make all this money, I can drink more and stay out later and still get it done.
Yeah. Yeah, and on Wall Street, then that's the mentality. You just show up on time, no matter what state you're in. Same here in the city of London. And you just function, however you function. And so, yeah, that's the thing. And as you said in your book, it's like a candy store there.
Right.
What bar are we going to meet at? You got a choice of 10,000. So we'll meet downtown, uptown, this and that. And so the drinks would then turn into the drugs. And some of those guys were now into cocaine. And so that was their kind of drug of choice. I, for whatever reason, never really got into that drug. For me, I didn't feel like I needed it. Some people are like, yeah, it makes me feel powerful and blah, blah, blah. For me, that wasn't my drug necessarily. I didn't go off on that. Also, when we chose to go and do cocaine, it was like, we are going back to someone's house and doing it for 4 hours.
Right.
And talking and playing Wall Street.
Yeah.
Like this whole concept of doing a little in the club was nothing we would ever do.
No.
It was like, we're going to do massive amounts at someone's house and talk rubbish and drink. And it was
until it's dawn, and then just go take a shower and go to work. Right?
Yeah, that happened a couple times. That cannot really be repeated. I mean, it's really hard to do that on a regular basis. But we did it for sure. And it was also a lot of fun and a great bonding experience with these guys. And there must have been something good at the time. But that kind of behavior is not sustainable ever, let alone in what is a high performance job. And you can say, well, a lot of people are doing it. But we started doing things like that. Yeah. And then one night, let's do some ecstasy during the week. That was kind of new then. Can we do it during the week and get the next day be functional? Yeah, we can. Okay, well, if we do it before 11, we can do it. And so starting to push the envelope on that. And then one night, my buddy had a dealer that said, do you want some downtown? And they used to call, everyone had code words for their drugs. And Coke was uptown. And if you wanted downtown, that was heroin. And it was this powdered stuff that I guess they probably get on the East Coast more than anything. And it was, kind of cool, right? This is cool. This is what some other people do. We had heard about this. And I remember when I was growing up.
I live in the East Village.
Yeah. I mean, although I never really saw it in the East Village. And when I was growing up, I had two books that were Bibles. One was American Psycho, Bret Easton Ellis, and it wasn't a story about some twisted dude. It was like a Bible. So we used to try to dress like.
That's all you need to know to understand how twisted you were.
I am. It gets worse. There was another book called Pimp by Iceberg Slim.
Right, I know that book.
It's an amazing book, and that was also one of our Bibles. So this was all the way a pimp would behave to handle his prostitutes, and he used to also regularly take girl and boy, which are the code words for cocaine and heroin. And he functioned this whole life of running his organization and keeping icy cool in his head and running this game on this girl and this girl. And so we would read these two books over and over and over again and use these code names. And so when the boy showed up, which is the code name for the heroin, then that was just something we were like, oh, we've heard about this. We try to push every other aspect of our life to the limit. Like you said, there's a bravado in how much you can do. So then why wouldn't you try that? And so one night my buddy was just like, oh, I got some of this. Do you want to try that? And I was like, of course. Why wouldn't you do that? And so, and even though you'd heard the horror stories, this and this and this and this, it didn't matter.
It didn't matter.
And that was definitely a turning point for me because I really liked that stuff.
Yeah. So did you snort it, or you?
Yeah. I mean, I'm not a drug addict. I'm not a fucking.
No, you're a high-paid Wall Street guy.
Exactly. I'm not a fucking drug addict. I'm not some homeless person. I'm not a piece of white trash. I would never stick something in my vein, right? I mean, like. That would be just inconceivable for me. No, I snort it. That's it. So it's okay, right? So this is the flawed logic. And
so, what was the experience of doing heroin for the very first time?
I believe I probably, got sick or threw up or something. But it made me relaxed. It made me calm. It actually made me really social. I could go talk to people and have this cool conversation. I remember going to my girlfriend's Christmas work party in Soho, and I was like the coolest guy there. Now later she told me sometimes you thought you were the coolest guy there, but I would go around and say hi to everybody, have these engaging conversations. They're like, wow, Brian's really cool. And I had just done a couple lines of heroin and I was fine. Normally, that would have been really hard to do, even with drinking. I would have been like, hey, how you doing? Talk to a few people, can we get out of here? Right. And so I just became like, I would become relaxed, I would become kind of happy, and it was just something that, it was better than what I had been trying to do with alcohol, I think, in that same scenario. Yeah,
heroin is a weird thing, and I think, we have this idea of what a heroin user or a heroin addict looks like, and it's that image of the strung out guy or the emaciated person with a needle hanging out of their arm, and it leads to that, or it can lead to that, and it often leads to that. But before it culminates in that, somebody who's using heroin, I've noticed that you can't tell. Like you don't know. It's very subtle. Unless you're used to being around a lot of people who are on heroin all the time. Most people could have an interaction with somebody who's high on heroin and have no idea.
Yeah. Very true. Yeah. You might see them scratching a little bit, but that that might even take a little more of a dose. And especially if they've been doing it for a little while, then maybe it kind of makes them normal-ish. But yeah, very true. And there's people that are functional heroin addicts for 20 years that are even, in professions. I don't know if it happened on Wall Street, but you're totally right. People don't know. And this is before the pills came out and the OxyContins and stuff. So we hadn't seen that version of a opiate addict. And so, yeah, again, people wouldn't necessarily know, and it would make me actually really social, and it would make me really different. I remember this really funny thing. It's maybe not funny, but we would stay up all night doing drugs. My boys would be kind of doing more of the coke, and I'd mix the coke and the heroin, do speedballs. It would kind of keep me up, a little bit of both. And we would go walk at Central Park at like 8 in the morning. And I remember, like, sometimes people would walk by, and I'd be like, "Hey, how are you?" And they'd be like, "Would you just shut up?" And that was the two difference of those drugs.
Yeah.
One was like, "Hey, very friendly and happy," and one was just like, "I'm in my own head." And so that was a turning point for me when I touched that stuff, and I liked it too much.
It woke something up in you.
Yeah, it just got me to be where I couldn't normally be. I could never be relaxed. I could never just be calm in the moment. I didn't train back then, and I just didn't know how to do that. Most of my life was just a crisis, and so that was a real turning point for me. And I had the drug dealer on demand, a Russian guy that would drive around in an SUV with a cigar, and he would just deliver it to you, bam, bam, bam. No shady deals, no weird things. It was just too easy. And so that was a turning point for me.
And so how did that begin to manifest in your life? Like, to what point did it escalate?
So it just became more and more common, and so first it was once or twice here, we would do it, and then now every time we're going out drinking, it'd be like, well, let's ship a little bit of this in as well, and it would become more and more common. I remember one time, 5 o'clock on a sunny afternoon, totally sober, I just got my hair cut at Bumble and Bumble. I think I was blonde back then, and I just made a call, and I'm like, you know what, I'm gonna go home and relax and ship in some boy, as we would say, and that is when I noticed, wow, you don't even need to be drunk to do this. This is just my night to myself where I can just have a calm, relaxing evening. And that's what I would do. And that was when I started noticing, okay, this is something that you don't have to be drunk to do.
Right. Did you ever use it at work?
Well, yeah. So then, and then it starts coming to this. So I would never drink before work, but then it got to be where
all those rules start to go out the window.
Exactly. And so then it would slowly start going to where maybe I'd wake up and have like just a little bit of coke and heroin before I went to work, a little snort of each, and it would like kind of wake me up. And again, most people probably didn't know. And it was a smaller team. I wasn't on a trading floor and like I had to make those crazy decisions.
So this is when you're the CFO.
Yeah, this is when I'm on the .com side.
Right.
And so I can function more, and I think I can function more. Of course, little do I know, it's getting worse and worse every day.
Right.
And again, I'm also looking at myself. I'm coming close to 30. We were watching Fight Club over and over again, and there's a line where he says, I'm a 30-year-old boy. And my friends are slowly becoming successful around me, and I'm going nowhere. And the more I see that, the more I want to medicate myself. The more I medicate, the worse I feel. I mean, those hangovers really add up over and over and over again. And I just see myself as a major failure. At this point, when you're in your 20s, you give yourself a little bit of runway. But at this point, it's obvious I've failed. I was promised. I mean, I had so much promise. I had the Wall Street job. And at this point, objectively, you have to say, Brian, you suck. And I think that just made the behavior go more.
Yeah, you have a choice: either clean up and get your shit together, or medicate the pain by just using more. Usually it's the latter. The volume gets turned up on the using until it gets so out of control.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wish I would have been able to look at myself somehow and just say, look, it's just so obvious what's happening here. But at the same point too, I was all about.
But it's not about logic or rationality.
Yeah. And also, it was about how can Brian get more money? How can Brian get more money? When you go at the world like that, it's just like it's not a big surprise that you're hitting dead ends everywhere. It wasn't like, how can I create something that's really of value? It was like, so that with the madness of New York, with all these drugs in the background, and I was just in this place where I couldn't see very far in front of me. And the obvious solution was medicate. And the more I did behaviors like that, it just starts to get worse and worse and worse. And then the behavior is noticed.
Yeah. Did you graduate to the needle?
No, never graduated to the needle.
Yeah.
I mean, why would I have to? I could do some pretty good damage.
Well, the tolerance starts to, creep up. And then that's what ultimately, most heroin addicts say, "Oh, I'll never," they start out snorting it, and I'll never shoot it up, never shoot it up. But then they become so tolerant to it that it becomes the only option to get high the way they want to get high.
Yeah, I mean, I could do some pretty good damage with the amount that guy would deliver. It wasn't a gram, it was like 0.4 grams. But I mean, I would do enough to where I'd just pass out, And so for me, I was doing plenty of damage there. As
were you nodding off at work?
Maybe not at work, because I would probably speedball before work. But at night, I constantly would nod off. And that's a great sign, by the way, if you see people nod it off in public, of what they're doing. But no, never went there, and I think I would have been a ways from going there. Again, I had this big block in my head, like I can't do that. And again, I wouldn't even know, I was never around people. I wasn't copying on the street. I wasn't hanging out with people that did that stuff.
Right.
If my dealer went out of town, I wouldn't even know where to get it. Like I would never know where to get it. Like I couldn't go to the East Village Avenue D and start asking around. That was too socially weird for me. So I would just kind of bear it out.
Right.
And I knew I was at this situation. Sometimes I would come off it for a couple days, and it wasn't a nice couple days, like having the flu. And then you'd do that for a few days more, and then you'd find a reason to kind of go back on it. So, there are physical implications, but my life was quote unquote manageable. But people around me would start to just see something's not right with Brian.
Yeah.
My girlfriend's like, something's not right, you're gross. My behavior, my performance is going down and down. And then I start doing some dangerous things with that drug, because snorting it can get a little hairy as well.
Yeah, well, speedballs, it gets pretty frightening with that too, I would think.
Yeah, and so that's a combination of cocaine and heroin, and so that gets a little scary because you don't know how much you're doing. But it got to a point where one night I snorted too much, and I stopped breathing. And people don't realize that's how you die when you heroin overdose. You just stop breathing. Because your whole body shuts down. I mean, the other thing with heroin, your digestion shuts down. You don't go to the bathroom for days. Everything just slows down. And so, you can do plenty of damage snorting heroin, like plenty.
Yeah.
And so, that happened one night right in front of my girlfriend, and she had to call the emergency room. And it was a traumatic event for her. I tried to laugh it off.
Did she know that you were using heroin?
Yes, but I don't think she realized how much. But I think we had done something together, but she didn't realize it had hooked me. And so we weren't living together either. And so one night I did a lot at my place, and for some reason she called and said, "Come over." And I got into a cab and I went over there. I'd already done it all. I climbed up her 6th floor walk up, and then I passed out on her bed and stopped breathing. And if I hadn't been in my
stayed home,
I'd be dead.
Wow.
Yeah. And that's sobering. I woke up in an emergency room the next day. They give me that Naxtrolone stuff. They asked me where I was from. I wouldn't give them any information. And I thought about actually going to work as a CFO that day, but I was like, I'm going to take the day off. But it didn't really hit me. I mean, it hit me, but it didn't make me change my behavior.
Right. That wasn't enough.
That wasn't enough. It really traumatized my girlfriend. And I went back to her place later. She actually left town for a few days, and I went back with one of my buddies, and we saw all the oxygen pumps and tape on the floor where they resuscitated me, and we tried to make some jokes about it. But
so your buddies weren't like, "Hey, Brian, I think
they were just as out of control as me. I
right.
mean, they were doing coke and hiring prostitutes. Like that was their thing. That was their thing. Mine was just doing heroin and watching TV. That was my thing.
Yeah, I think people that aren't addicts or alcoholics have a hard time wrapping their heads around the idea that something like that could happen to you and you wouldn't course correct. The elevator's clearly going down. It's not going to get better. It's only going to get worse. And yet that wasn't enough to get you to modify your lifestyle.
No.
That's how powerful and cunning and baffling it is.
Yeah. Amen.
You'll come up with these rationalizations that will allow you to continue to covet this thing that in your mind is still serving you. Right,
because it gives you that feeling in your brain like nothing else can. And when people talk about how happy their family and their business and being of service, that dopamine is very similar to what you can get for $100. And so it's very obvious now why you just make that short-term decision. I had no bird's eye view, no perspective, no one watching me. I wouldn't listen to anybody anyways. It was always like I was always making the decisions.
Yeah.
So, I needed something more serious before my behavior would change.
Right. Well, a couple more things occur, right? How long after that incident was it that you got fired?
So yeah, my best buddy from school, you know, he was actually employing me now. It's like a different .com that I had moved to, but you know, he was doing that. My girlfriend was watching me. I think I did another overdose as well, where I kind of was resuscitated by my friends. And this is starting to get ridiculous, right? And so, you know, and again, another time I could have just died. And they are just, I mean, my girlfriend's just like, has no time for me at this point. You know, it's just so destructive. She's trying, and at some point she just sees how destructive I am. And I think she left me first and just, you know, left me. She left me in a beautiful way as well. She had sex with someone else and then told me, right? And just said, by the way, I just did that, you know? And then I'm like, what a great way to do it. And so it put me in this situation where there wasn't much bargaining going on there. It was this untenable situation, and I don't want to talk to you again. And so that tumult started happening. Total shock. 4 years of a relationship, you know, I never saw this coming.
Have you talked to her since?
I actually did talk to her after I spent time with John Joseph in New York City. I talked to her.
Oh wow, that's cool.
So I talked to her, but at the time, you know, she just had to get the hell away from me. I was so destructive, and it was literally going nowhere, and I wouldn't listen to anyone. So that happened. My performance at work was getting so shocking that my best buddy called me up and said, "You're fired." And I remember one of the most embarrassing moments still to this day is I remember I woke up on the sofa after, I'm sure, doing some heroin, and I was feeling so bad. I think I'd been partying all weekend. I don't know what the hell I was doing. Coke, or maybe I was smoking some crack. I don't know what the hell I was doing. And I remember thinking,
I like how you just slipped crack in
there
casually. Like, wait a minute, what?
Oh, yeah, I mean, like when you're a banker and you're trying everything, like someone pulls the crack out one time and tries smoking that too. So, and again, maybe because it was a cocaine derivative, it never made me that interested. But yeah, I mean, we tried pretty much everything. I didn't try speed, which was probably good. I didn't try ketamine, but you know, whatever, the other things I tried.
Right. Crack, coke, and cocaine, and heroin, you're covered.
Am I good? I mean, I think maybe speed could have been really dangerous for me, but I didn't. So yeah, and I remember it was like Sunday evening, and I was thinking, you know what, I'm just going to tell him I'm not going to be at work tomorrow because it's going to be so bad. Normally the workaholic would not let that happen. So I called my buddy up, and I said, look, I'm not going to be at this meeting tomorrow. I know we need to be there, but I can't be there. And I called him up, and this is my best buddy, who had got me this job and who got me this other job, you know, when I was screwing up at the other job, and I was running one of his companies. It was important. And he said, Brian, it's 6 in the morning on Sunday. And I thought it was 6 in the evening on Sunday. And he's like, what is wrong with you? And I was just like, I just felt this so much embarrassment. Like, how messed up am I that I don't even know what part of the day it is? And soon after, he sacked me. So my best buddy in college, when we just studied finance together and figured out how options worked, he had sacked me. So now I have no job, no friend, no girlfriend. And I just went into this really low place where I remember I would go 4 or 5 days and not speak a word, because you can do that in New York City. You go to the shop and you just put the stuff on, and then they give you the stuff. And I just got really insulated and isolated, and just went to a really low point.
Does the using increase at this point?
I think it stayed steady. I think I just kept using, you know, yeah. I think
and this is like summer of 2001?
Yeah, late summer of 2001.
Right.
You know, yeah, summer, autumn 2001.
Okay, so we all know what happened in September of that year.
Oh yeah, of course. So yeah, so actually I was sacked, I think, in October. So I was still working and 9/11 happened. My girlfriend had left me, but I was still working. So yeah, 9/11, what an incredible day. You know, I still remember being there. I still remember all of the things that happened.
Were you downtown?
I was downtown. I was living on Houston Street. So when I flagged the taxi drove kind of down Houston to get to where I was going to go on the east side. And I remember people lined up along the road looking at the Trade Center. I remember looking at the Trade Center and seeing a big hole in the side.
You didn't hear it though?
No, I didn't hear it. I think I had an MP3 player on, and so I didn't see or hear it. I think I was flagging a cab. And I saw a big hole, and I told the taxi driver, I was like, that's a big hole. And he's like, yeah, a plane went in there. And I was like, wow, that's messed up. And then we drove a couple more minutes, and he said, another plane went in there. And I said, oh, fuck. And that's when it all...
You didn't hear that either? You were in the cab when the second one hit?
Yeah, I think I was. Or it had happened, and I wasn't actually, I could see the building, but it was quite, it was still a mile or so away. And yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I think I was in the cab when it happened, or when we got the radio report that it happened. So, so because Houston to World Trade's still a ways.
Yeah, but
you might not hear it.
It can't be more. It's about a mile.
Couple miles, maybe.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe I was oblivious. So that day was really intense. I remember all of it. My buddies were calling me from the trading floor. They had all the info. I heard one just went to the Pentagon. I hear this just happened, and all the phones were locked out. And I remember walking home that day. That was the weirdest day in New York City. It was bright outside, sunny day, and they'd shut down all the public transportation. F-16 jets were scrambled going down the Hudson River, and everybody walked home. And it was this silent walk of everyone in New York City walking down the sidewalk, and I walked 30-some blocks home.
Yeah.
Of course, got a bottle of vodka on the way home, went to my roof deck, and just watched the towers burn.
Right. So you, when the towers fell, you were at work?
I was on my way to work.
On your way to work.
It was like 9-something in the morning.
Yeah. But your office wasn't super downtown.
No, I mean, I was in the .com area now, so I was actually in the garment district in the 30s and 8th Avenue.
Right. So you're pretty far
I was
uptown.
there, yeah.
And Bankers Trust was not in the Trade Center.
It was right next door to it. So they ended up taking that building down, One Liberty Plaza. So yeah, the building I used to be in is no longer there.
Did you have friends that were traders that worked in the towers?
Yeah. I knew about 3 people that were up at the top. Because I turned into a broker, and Cantor Fitzgerald was at the top. So I knew a few people that didn't make it, And it was a really low time for New York City. I lived in the East Village. I mean, the smell of, I thought it was like jet fuel and decomposing bodies was there, but it really smelled foul for a month or so there. And it was hectic, man. I mean, military troops, and it was a real thud for New York City. And maybe for me too. It was a weird moment. At the same time, I'd be out with my buddies, and we would try to bravado through it,
Right.
And just be like, yeah, who cares, whatever, all these flags are stupid, we would do that, that was us, of course we would, One of my buddies gave blood, and we're like, what are you, you're a loser, and then, all these crazy, I remember one of my buddies was like, if I got a flag, it would be a Prada flag. And I'd be like, yeah, just like, all the American Psycho stuff.
So twisted.
Yeah, we were knee deep in it, and knee deep in it. And so that all happened there. And so that was a real punctuation to that whole year. It was just like,
right.
It was just it was just as low as I could get.
Yeah, so they say that, the most sort of psychologically traumatizing things that can happen are changing relationship, changing where you're living, and changing your career. So you lose a job, you lose a girlfriend, 9/11 happens, you're in this, surreal environment in New York City, and then just throw a bunch of heroin and cocaine on top of it and light a match, right?
Yeah. And this lack of self-esteem, and this 30-year-old marker of you're a failure, and you had so much promise, and you've never been a failure before, and it's all your fault. And you're addicted to drugs, and as you know, using these substances, like I've now realized, every year you're a subject to them, it just grinds down that self-esteem into where deep down that you're no good, because you can't be you without these things. And it really ground me down to where I think I was kind of like a shell of a man at that point.
So where does the elevator hit the ground?
So I'm unemployed. I'm barely surviving. I'm starting to think, what am I going to do? I don't have any money left. No one knows about this except for a couple close friends and my girlfriend. Parents have no idea, although I'm sure they know my behavior's been weird.
But nobody's trying to intervene on your behalf and get you help or get you clean or anything?
No, I mean, I had like 2 friends at the same point. They were having their own problems with coke, and so I didn't have any other friends. So and I didn't tell anybody what was going on. So everyone was having their own crisis moments with the drugs, and they would end up working through those, and in their own ways pass through them on their own. And I was dealing with mine. Mine was with heroin, a little trickier, because you can die, but not any less easy to kick. And some of the behavior patterns with cocaine is shocking.
Not easy at all.
I mean, the money and all the stuff they did. So I'm grinding down, running out of options, and I just finally think, okay, I had worked in London for 2 years. I'm going to put out some feelers and see if I can go back into the banking business, and just see if anyone will have me back. I have to get out of this city. I knew I have to get out of Dodge. This is where my dealers are. This is where my peer group is. And even people said, yeah, Brian, get the hell out of Dodge. And so that's what, I sent 3 emails to people in London. I got 1 response, and they said, yeah, okay, we could probably start you off as some junior role.
Right, at a lower level than you were qualified for.
For sure, yeah.
Right.
But at this point, I had no job. Like, I was running out of money.
You know what this is called, though?
What's this?
It's called pulling a geographic.
Oh, really?
Yeah, you didn't know? You never heard of that?
I never heard that term. No.
So this is what happens when an addict thinks that the solution to their problem is geographically based. And if they just move, they can put their past in the rear view mirror and start fresh. But what typically occurs, and it sounds like you had a bit of a different experience, but what typically occurs is you arrive in this new place and it may start fine, but you slowly realize that you brought all of your baggage with you, and those behaviors start to resurface once again.
Yeah, I never heard that term, so it's interesting. And I understand that, definitely.
Yeah.
And I could see also maybe if you move from a U.S. city to a U.S. city, but I could see that. For me, I think those last few months of just also being completely alone. I remember I used to have to get out of my apartment for like the cleaning lady to come, and I wouldn't know where to go. And I think I went so deep into myself as far as like the shame, the failure, that I don't know, I think something switched there. And I was just like, I need to get out of here, and I don't know, something happened. But I didn't know if I was gonna be able to kick this.
Right.
But that was the decision that was made. And so I remember I came over for a trip in December, and then the start date was January 3rd, 2002, for me to move from New York City to London.
And so you made the move, and you kicked, you got clean?
So I remember that day, I think I left January 2nd, yeah, and I landed the 3rd, and I remember January 2nd, before I left my house, of course I did all my last bits of heroin. I remember I took a taxi to the airport at JFK. At the time, there were armed troops there, which was a weird thing to see. You never used to see this in American airports with M16s. And I remember I opened the taxi door and I threw up on the ground in front of these Marines, and they looked at me like, and I was like, and then I got on the plane.
So you were kicking heroin on an intercontinental flight.
Yeah.
I pity the person who was sitting next to you.
I probably had a few hours of that left of me. But yeah, that's how I did it. And I remember throwing up and feeling like this is as low as it gets, Brian. And I got on the plane, got in London, got to London, and again, didn't know anyone here, felt still very low. I had a job to show up.
But you had worked here before,
Yeah.
so you must have known some people.
I knew a few people.
Yeah.
No, I knew a few people, but yeah, I didn't have like friends and things like that. So knew a few people. I'd known the city. I'd always been successful here. I'd always done great here. You know, I'd always really finally had some success, and I got here, and that was the day. And I was just going to be like, well, what's going to happen, Brian? You know, what are you going to do? And I definitely wanted to not do heroin anymore. It was something I'm sure I told myself, like, you know, this is happening.
Yeah.
But I didn't have a program. I didn't have a group. I didn't have anything. I just was like, now is my new life, and I just started going, and I also didn't have a way of getting the stuff either, which sounds weird. Maybe I could go down to the corner, but like I'd never done that. And so it definitely was a friction that kept me from doing it, you know?
Yeah.
And I didn't stop drinking. So let's be honest. I didn't stop drinking, but I stopped doing heroin then.
Yeah.
And I went a week and then 2 weeks and I didn't go. So I
never did it again.
I never did it again.
That's amazing. I'm actually, you know, I'm amazed that you were able to do that totally on your own without any external help or any kind of program. Usually the addict is so cunning, you know, well, I don't know any dealers, so you know, it's fine, but you'll figure out a way to find out who the guy is, right?
Yeah, I also have listened to a lot of people that have talked to people and about addiction and what it is, and what, you know, what the peer group and the surroundings are and what happens in your head, and you know, it's definitely not a physical thing necessarily, you know, for these people. So, you know, I think something happened in my brain. I think something got the message finally with the girlfriend and the friends and the job and the best friend, and I think it just all lined up to where it was just enough where my brain triggered and said, we just can't do this anymore. But yeah, it doesn't make sense, but it happened, and I just started rebuilding from that day, you know, and I needed to rebuild. I know I needed to rebuild, and so the next 3 or 4 years of my life were just rebuilding Brian, and I had some very important people that helped me do that, and it was a big time for me, But at the same time, still drinking as well. So,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah. You know, what's interesting about that is that, you know, another thing people aren't fully cognizant about when it comes to addiction is that the drugs aren't the problem, they're the solution to the problem. And they work until they stop working. And when you remove the drugs from the equation, that's just the beginning of the journey towards ultimately addressing the problem that led you to the drugs in the first place, right? And I feel like you lined your life up in a way, maybe even unconsciously, to begin to address those issues without resorting to NA or AA or any of the, you know, kind of traditional recovery programs. You found some way to do it without all of that. But it is amazing that you never lapsed back. The typical story is people will find their way back to the drugs until it brings them so low that they ultimately get to this place of surrender where they have to seek help in one of those formats.
Yeah. And I definitely had gone pretty low, for sure.
Yeah.
And, you know, look, after about
like
6...
John says, you can always go lower.
It's below rock
Yeah.
bottom, you get on with the maggots.
Yeah.
But, you know, about 6 months after I got here, I started training martial arts with a guy that would train me for 8 years. And he was a very serious role model. And whenever I was even close to doing something stupid, I'd just be like, well, what would he say? And I could not show up in any kind of a state. And so I just started building these things around me that, I don't know, were kind of these anchors. And that stuff that happened in New York was just so fresh and so painful. I mean, so painful to me that I just didn't want to be him anymore. And maybe I admitted it was me at some point, subconsciously or consciously. And I was just like, it's not happening from here on out. It's not happening in London. And London was always this Brian or this reality, and we're going to make that happen. And work started going really well, and I had a place there. I was needed, I was wanted, I was successful, and it just started building. But, you know, that was that road for me. So the geographic really helped me in that sense.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like you're an outlier. Like, it's almost like you applied self-will to a situation, to a context in which self-will usually is powerless, right? But somehow you were able to find a way to make it work. It's not the typical story. I know that when I got sober, it took many, many, many years before I could go back to New York City and feel comfortable, because it's such a trigger, and there's such a heavy association with a certain kind of lifestyle that I had transcended, but still felt unsafe. You know, should I go there? And now I have an amazing relationship with that city, and I love it. It's completely different from what it used to be, but that took a long time. And it sounds like it's been kind of a similar thing with you.
Very much so. I mean, I happened to start dating a girl right before I came back to London, and so I had a kind of a girlfriend in New York while I just moved to London, and she was begging me to come back that year, my first year of, you know, heroin sobriety. And I told her no. I'm like, there's no way, because for me, there was no way that city was going to mean bad news for me. And so I remember I refused all of that, but I did come back 1 year later for New Year's Eve. And I told my boys, I'm like, if I see anything around, like, nothing is showing up that night. So don't bring anything. And and I remember going back, and I took a taxi over to my buddy's place in the East Village where we used to spend all night. And I don't have panic attacks and anxiety attacks, but I definitely had one in that taxi, because it brought back all of these bad memories.
Yeah.
And those stayed for a long time.
Agitated and uncomfortable the whole time.
A long time. So I was definitely aware that there was potentially a whole darkness there, and I stayed away intentionally for a year and for many years later.
Yeah. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like this is a new chapter where you're getting comfortable sharing, you know, this aspect of your life. Being specific, I should say, about the heroin use. I know that in past interviews you said, oh, it was a dark time, or I was out of control, or I was partying too much. But unless I'm wrong, it wasn't until this Iron Mind series where you actually said explicitly, like, what you were actually doing.
Yeah, look, it was something that was always on my mind, but I never told anyone. Like, I never told my wife or any of my close friends. You know, and this is 16 years, right? Not exactly something you're proud of. And so, yeah, if you've watched my previous interviews, it was like I party a lot, I drank a lot. But I didn't use the H word. It's a very polarizing word. But when this thing happened with John, and he invited me to go to New York City, and things really started happening there. And it really happened when I was training on that bike in episode 3 or something with Samantha. Just being back there was always hard for me. And then again, I stayed in the East Village to shoot with John, and being around John, and probably John being open about his addictions. I was on that bike, and when I was pushing it, it was like some type of cardio test they do there, and I just started having flashbacks of all these people I let down in New York City, and I was really crying on that bike. You can't really see, I'm sweating so much, but I was just crying. I could see all the people, my girlfriend I let down, my buddy I let down, me, and all these tragic situations. And it was finally the time where maybe I maybe with New York City and some of the things that happened. And it was weird that it happened. My whole crew was freaked out. They were like, I've never seen you cry, Brian. We didn't think this was gonna happen, but it all happened there. I don't know if it was the training, or maybe it was because John was there, I could talk about it, but it was maybe time to finally deal with this. Because every time I go back to New York, it's always this menace. This is the city that I didn't make it. You know, if you can make it anywhere, if you can make it there, you can make it anywhere. I didn't make it there, and so I remember all the bad things in New York. I go to the East Village, and I remember the bad things that happened there. So yeah.
But this is the healing. Like this is true sobriety. This is recovery. This is the process, the journey of surrendering and letting go, and detaching from your ego and the shame and your association with what your core group, your friends, will think of you, or your audience if they know this deep, dark secret that you harbor. Like, I know that I could not have stayed sober had I not made peace with all of that, like in the early days, and that's what kind of my process has been about. But you trying to kind of will yourself forward and just, you know, part ways with it and kind of compartmentalize it in your mind, I think has been, has hamstrung you, because you've been holding on to this shame, and beneath that shame, this fear, like, what happens if people actually know this about me, and what will that mean, and what will they think of me? And ultimately, that's sort of just percolating in your unconscious mind, or perhaps even in your conscious mind. And I think it's prevented you from being a fully integrated human being, so that you can kind of stand in your truth and own it, right? So I feel like I don't know where you're at in this process, but that journey towards being okay with it, like, is how you transcend the shame, you know? And that shame has only held you back.
Yeah, and you know, and I talked to Gabor Mate about this. I know he's been on your show.
Yeah.
And he said, you have nothing to be ashamed of. There's nothing to be ashamed of here. And so, I totally agree. I thought I had compartmentalized it, right, just like a good engineer would do. And so, I didn't think it mattered or it affected me anything. And so, yeah, now I'm kind of opening up about it. And when it happened with John in New York, and I remember I wrote an email here that I sent out to all my people, and it was just straight up, you know, let's just straight go in. It's called heroin. This is what happened. This is what happened. This is what happened. And it was a really hard email to send. And yet we preach on London Real that you need to, you need to be open and honest and vulnerable to get where you want to go. And so even somebody said that here. There's like, I've had students of mine that have come up about their past sexual abuse and all that stuff when they're sitting in this chair, and it's just like, and we applaud them and they move forward. And it's just like, if you don't do this, Brian, then
right.
Who
so
are
there's
you?
this dissonance that you've been sitting with for such a long time.
Yeah, and then now that I see it, it's so important. And that's this movie Iron Mind is ultimately about that. It's about people getting in touch with these quote unquote secrets and these shameful pieces of their life that are hamstringing them in ways they don't know. And I know this was. I still don't think I know. It's still really fresh for me. But I know it was really holding me back. And again, I go back to this service thing. It's just like, if I can talk about this, especially now that the heroin is now turned into all these opioids and stuff, if I can be the one that someone else looks at and says, okay, well, that he's the guy, it makes it really easy to talk about this. Because now I can turn something that was this dark, dark moment in my life of so much pain into something that actually can do some good. So like that's an amazing realization for me, and that maybe there was a purpose for this, like me overdosing, maybe there was a purpose to maybe show someone else one day that they don't have to do this, is one thing. And the second thing, and I told John this, is that I was actually super proud of getting off the heroin. Like that was one of the proudest moments of my life. So in a weird way, there's like an accomplishment there. So, but yeah, this has been a really interesting method of self-discovery. And
yeah, spinning it for the benefit of others, but also a process of becoming the best version of you, right? To own your past, to not let it hold that power over you, I think is something that, you know, we're all looking for. And we all have, you know, there's layers to this, right? It's like, how deep do you want to go? We all have things that, you know, we don't want other people to know about. But the more that we can usher the courage to shed light on these things, I think the more integrated we become. And I would imagine that was like a very cathartic moment for you. You know, it's a huge breakthrough.
Yeah, and it wouldn't have happened, you know, without, you know, this show, which is weird. You know, it kind of forces me to step up and do all these things. And, you know, it was weird. It was weird telling my wife, you know, and she's just like, what? You know, that's the kind of person I am, though. It's like compartmentalized.
Right, so you did, like, that's the amazing thing. Like, you're married and your wife didn't even know.
Of course not.
Yeah.
That's a horrible, shameful part of my past. Like, why would I tell anyone that? And I mean, I had tried to write some things in the past and then try to think if I ever going to explain this to someone, but I couldn't think of a good reason. And then with this whole process, it really came out naturally.
How did she take it?
Well, you know, of course, in my typical London Real style, I film her while I'm telling her.
That was what I was getting at. I was like, oh my God.
That didn't go over very well.
You're gonna make this confession to her, but you're also going to have a camera there?
Yeah, so this is how twisted I am. First of all, I can't even confess this to her. I need to make the episode of Iron Mind to confess it to her. So she's like, what happened in New York? I was like, yeah, it was pretty crazy with John, and it was dramatic, and I got emotional. That's all I told her.
Yeah.
So then we got back, and we had to edit the episode that actually shows the conversation with me and John where I talk about the heroin. And of course, I want to get it the right thing, even to let her know, because I think it's better that I show her a perfectly edited version of the story. And then I wanted to get her reaction just on camera. So again, I don't necessarily recommend that to everyone, and maybe that's not the right way to do it. Maybe it's not.
Well, she acquitted herself professionally on camera, but what happened when the camera turned off?
So yeah, great question. So so I tell her on camera that she sees this heroin thing, and so yeah, she kind of has a reaction on camera where you can tell, first of all, you know, she's very loving and supportive of me coming out with something like this.
Yeah.
She can tell how emotional I was. I still get emotional thinking about this right now. It's still very raw. But yeah, afterwards, it's more of the, why didn't you tell me? You know, that kind of betrayal. I wish I would have known that about you. And then I try to think about it, her, like, would I have wanted to know if she had had this addiction? And part of me is like, no, that's her business. But of course, I guess I would have wanted to know.
Right, but you're an engineer.
Yeah,
you know,
exactly.
And she's a woman, and it's about trust, and it's about intimacy.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, no, she wasn't happy about that. Exactly,
Yeah.
It's about trust and intimacy, and I'm a male engineer. And for us, it's like, well, that shouldn't make any difference. But yeah, it was hard. She was upset for a few days of not knowing. She always knew something happened then, but didn't necessarily know the details. But, you know, on the other side, I think really sees the strength in me coming out with it. So there's that. I think it's done processing, but, you know, I don't know. And everyone's different. You know, I heard from my stepmother really quickly, and she was really supportive. It took me months to talk to my dad about it. I still haven't really talked to my mom about it. I mean, they've been supportive over emails, but I had to talk to my dad about it. And someday I had to talk to my daughter about it. That was hard.
What did she say?
She was really, that's a hard one because she's 14. She's my stepdaughter. That's harder because, you know, she's grown up knowing me as, you know, dad, kind of indestructible dad, since she was 6. So that's hard. And then I got to tell a teenager talk to her about this, you know. And so I sat her down right after I filmed Mariana, and I grabbed Gabby and I said, I need to talk to you about something. And she's just like, what did I do? And I'm like, yeah, no, you didn't do anything. It's what I did. And I just said, look, there was a time where I started doing drugs, and it was heroin. I did this, and I did it until I died. And luckily I didn't die, and I'm still here. And I just want you to know that, look, you're going to have experiences with drugs. It's a natural thing. You're going to experiment with drugs and alcohol, and I'm not going to tell you not to do things. These are all part of this experience. But I'm like, this happened to me, and this is how I almost died. And I just want you to be able to come and talk to me about any of these experiences you have, and be able to ask me questions. And also, I'm not going to say don't do these things, because it's not realistic and it's not natural. It was a hard conversation, but she was like, "I'm really proud of you." That's what she said. So she took like this motherly tone with me, and it was actually much easier than I thought. So that was the hardest. And maybe someday I'll have to talk to my sons about it, but maybe not, because maybe they'll watch it. But it was hard. Hardest with her.
Not as hard as having to experience your child seeing you in that state, right? She's never seen you high.
No.
So you have that to be grateful for.
Yeah, I guess that's what they tell. That's what they tell everybody in AA, right? Yeah, it's a good line. No, it's true, exactly. And, imagine if she had seen that state. Yeah, it would have been horrible. Yeah. So, no, I mean, I'm so glad I did it. I'm so glad I came out with it. Are there repercussions? I don't know. I don't care, and it doesn't matter. And now I feel really good about it. I feel good about talking about it. It's been really eye-opening for me, and now and it was like in for a penny, in for a pound. So it was like once we did it, I felt like we just have to now go all in and come out and talk about it. And in every episode of Iron Mind, it starts off and I say heroin addiction. We didn't have to do that. I was just like, now this is part of my story, and I want to be honest about it. I want to talk about it. So now it's part of this weird thing that is me in London Real. So.
Yeah, well, I think it's important. The opioid crisis is insane right now, and we're not having the conversations we need to be having about treatment and rehabilitation. It's all about criminalization and the legal landscape. Meanwhile, millions of people are dying and suffering, and they don't have access to the help or the resources that they need to be able to turn their lives around and create their version of Brian Rose. So I think it's important to talk about it and to own that, in an honest way, and to really transcend and overcome that shame. I think connects with people because they see the humanity in it.
Yeah, and if these opioids had been around back then, I mean, I easily could be dead, easily. Snort some, what the hell is this? It's fentanyl, and it's 10,000 times as powerful. It's like, so I really want to talk about this, and I want people to see how serious this is, and people to know that their children are having these issues, and try to have the right conversation around these opioids, and they're super dangerous, and we need to talk about it from a lot of different standpoints, and not demonize the drug, and really talk about the people and the issues and the problems. And so I never thought I'd be in the position to be this person or be talking about it, but I am now, and that's great. And I'd like to be, and I'd like to talk more about this and make it a real thing. But it's not on brand, whatever that means. But this was never a brand. This was always me. This is my journey. This is my journey. It started with ayahuasca, and then it went here, and then I went to the castle, and then I dressed this way, and now I'm a recovering heroin addict, and then who knows what's going to happen in the future. So,
at what point in the timeline did ayahuasca come into the picture?
Right. So we started the show in 2011, and from the beginning it was something that we were talking about. It was just something we had heard about, and it was like, what is this medicine? And so for me, it was something interesting. I had watched Aubrey Marcus talk about it on the Joe Rogan Experience about a year earlier, so I had heard of it. At this point, at this point, I hadn't really had much psychedelic experience, probably a bad mushroom experience like people have had, bad or good, however you look at it, but nothing that made me ever want to go back there. And it was something that was being talked about. And then because of the show, we decided to do kind of a before and after ayahuasca ceremony.
So it was 10 years after you kicked heroin. It wasn't part of the equation.
It was 10 years afterwards. But at the same point, like you said, like, what was causing me to do the heroin. Like, if we really want to talk about this, what was causing me to drink every night from the years 18 up until, 30 something? What was causing me to drink every day for 25 years?
Yeah. So what was it?
I think I think ultimately it was the fact that I felt disconnected. I just felt disconnected, and also maybe I had to get away from my own brutal self-dialogue. I think those are the two things. I still don't know, but I think it is. And so for me, this ayahuasca experience I would have never done unless the show put me on the spot to do, because I would have probably never actually gone and done it. I went and did this thing that I went in with this plant medicine, and it told me some truths about myself, and things that I wasn't doing right and I was doing wrong. And
how did those truths get revealed to you?
So
what were the truths?
Yeah, I mean, I had 3 ceremonies, and the second ceremony was a big one. I remember I went to see my shaman, and she said, I was very nervous all day because I knew it's usually just a whole lot of bad news is what Brian Rose gets on the ceremony. Let me tell you how you've been screwing up and how much you suck. That's usually what ayahuasca tells me. Some people ride dragons and stuff.
How many times have you done it?
3.
Oh, yeah, okay.
3, and I'm about to go do it 3 more times in a few weeks.
Okay.
So, but when I did it the first time, I was so scared, but I felt so out of control, but I also felt like I learned things, or at least I got shown things that should have been obvious to me. And I told myself I was going to have 2 more ceremonies within the next year as part of my own internal healing, even though I didn't want to go back in. So a few months later, I did go back in, and my shaman said, Mother Ayahuasca says you need a big dose tonight. And I was like, great. And at the same time, I was dating my wife and her daughter, Gabby. I wasn't living with them because I was a sworn bachelor. I didn't want anybody to have to rely on me. I didn't want anybody that was going to hurt me emotionally. But I happened to have this little girl because I didn't know when I dated her that she was going to come. Okay, whatever. I was trying to figure it out, but I was by no means going to take that any further. And that second ayahuasca ceremony just really shook me up and just said, it's time for you to first of all, it showed me this 7-year-old boy that had been putting up barriers his whole life to try to keep people from hurting him, and how that isolated me my whole life and caused me not to be human. And it was just really obvious. And so it said, look at these people, they need you, like as a father. So it was really clear. So I went and I met with Gabby. She was like 8 or 9, and I asked her if she'd like to move in. And so I ended up moving in with the girls after that ceremony. And that was a major turning point in my life. And I think it just started getting me more connected. And I think for me, connection has been my healing, I think. And it's surged every improvement in me over the last 7 years. It's just getting more connected, getting more emotional, and feeling like I'm part of something bigger than me. And I didn't feel that way for a long time.
Yeah, it's like Gabor would say, it goes back to early childhood, and I'm sure at 7 years old when your parents divorced, there was suffering and there was pain associated with that deposited you to this place where, in order to protect yourself, you have to be the one making decisions about who gets to come on inside, right? And it's easier to push people away and be in control of that intimacy equation than allow yourself to be vulnerable and then, of course, put yourself in a position to get hurt, right? And so it's no mystery that you mature into this person who is trying to control your environment, sworn bachelor, basically looking to Patrick Bateman, the ultimate id and manifestation, in its most perverse, fashion of this concept of harming others to protect yourself, right? And ayahuasca breaks that seal and allows you to see that.
Yeah.
And the place that intimacy can hold in your life.
Yeah, that's a pretty good description of what was going on. And actually, when a relationship would let me down, it was almost a relief for me, because I'd be like, of course, that's what I thought. That's what I thought you would do. So in a weird way, when people would let me down, relationships or girlfriends, it was like a confirmation that I had made a mistake again by letting someone in. And so, that's what I was doing, building all these walls. Right. And then, and so this kind of just helped me see something that I couldn't see otherwise. And so I started making those changes, and and yeah, those have led to more changes. But if it wasn't, I think, for those ceremonies, I don't think I would even be a new father. Like all that stuff started happening. I just feel connected more to this this human, whatever, animal or organism, and I feel like I'm a part of it now, and I feel like I have a responsibility to it, and I think it's hard to feel that hyper connected and go down into an alcoholic or drug-related spiral. I don't know, maybe I'm sure the two can't exist. But for me, one was for one thing and one was the other. And I felt like I grew out a lot of those behaviors. I actually grew out a lot of my alcoholic behaviors. I grew out of it more and more. I felt connected and I was part of something. And I found that these little habits just dropped off.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, connectivity as solution and intimacy with others. It's interesting, you know, ayahuasca's come up a number of times on my podcast, and you know, we talked about it yesterday on your show, and I have this, you know, sort of inner conflict over the whole thing, because I've had conversations with people like yourself where you know, you and others have had demonstrable positive experiences that have been transformative in your own life. But as somebody who's been in recovery for a long time, and I said this yesterday, you know, the idea that a mind-altering substance is the solution to my problems is ultimately my biggest problem, right? Like that is what led me astray. And so it terrifies me that the idea of doing it, and yet also it's alluring, you know? And so I'm interested, you know, I shared my thoughts yesterday on the sort of applicability, you know, of this process for, you know, people across the board. Like what is, you know, like, because people are they're gonna listen to this, they're gonna watch it, like, oh wow, look what it did to Brian, like I'm gonna do that too. Like how do you communicate about this in a responsible way?
Yeah, and again, I know you weren't saying, and I'm not saying that ayahuasca is the solution to all your problems. What I find is it's just a really obvious reminder to me of my shortcomings. And so I think you can definitely get that through meditation, through long training, through introspection. But for me, it's like putting a mirror right up to my soul, and I get to see, you know, the things that I'm missing, that my conscious mind is missing, and that's really what it tells me. And I think for anybody out there who's curious about it, first of all, I think you need to spend a long time thinking about it and researching it. It actually took me 18 months from the time I heard the word until I had my first ceremony. And I was learning about it and trying to see if this was for me or not. The other thing I think that when you do it, you're given these lessons that apply to this life here, this real conscious world. And you're meant to go back and do some work. This is not something you need to go check in with once every few months. It's like, you know, something I think you do once a year or every few years. If you feel like, I just want to check in and see, am I missing something? Am I going off on the wrong path here? Is my ego taking over? Am I a dialogue telling me one thing when my heart is saying, what are you doing? You missed the point here, Brian. And so that's when I think it's a useful tool. But when you come back, you have to do the work. You have to go and move in with the girls and go through all the pain of, you know, living outside of cool Shoreditch and having to deal with a 7-year-old every day and feeling claustrophobic with people around. You got to do all the work and then meditate on it and try to figure out what's next. And so for me, it works maybe as that reminding tool of what's going on. But usually it's a message that's very painful for me to feel and hear. For me, it's very emotional. Sometimes I feel the pain of other people, and it's traumatic. It's not something I go into lightly. But for me, it was a tool that I used. Now, I haven't touched it for 5 years, probably because it's so hard to go in and do. But
I've got a friend who like did it, I don't know, 50 or 60 times last year.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Like every week.
Yeah. Look, I'm not here to tell someone how to use a substance, right? Our government tries to tell us how to use substances. So I don't do that, but I'm of a fan of the late Terence McKenna vibe, which is psychedelics should be used in very high doses, very infrequently. So if you're going to go in, first of all, treat it like a ceremony, whether it's psilocybin or something else. You should be quiet in your own, and you should be going deep in, and you're probably going to get some hard lessons, and you should do it very infrequently. And then go out and do some work in the real world, because this is the real world we live in. You can't trying to escape in this other world. For me, it doesn't make sense, but I'm not here to tell other people what to do. So that's what I think the tool is necessary to be used. And now I'm going back in to have this experience again. But I think also it's an amazing way to try to rip down the ego. I mean, that's what's happening in these experiences, is it's destroying the ego.
Yeah. When
I was a banker, I went to Amsterdam and we had a bunch of mushrooms and I thought, oh, it was going to be fun. It ripped down my ego and I wasn't ready for that. It's a horrible, horrible experience. And so now I'm going in again to see if I'm doing the wrong things, if I'm not paying attention to what's really important, which what got me this far, which is this idea of service, or this idea of a long-term goal, or of doing something that's not just about you. Because every time I've done that in my life, I ended up unhappy and alcoholic and depressed. And every time I do something the other way, I get closer and closer to being someone I really want to be. Mm-hmm. And so, but even I can get caught up with thinking the wrong things. So for me, it's potentially a porthole into showing me what I really want.
I would venture to say that you already know what those things are.
And you might be right.
And so if I was to ask you, where are your blind spots, or where is your Achilles heel, and where is the work that you still need to do?
So I would agree. It's not things I don't know deep down in my heart, and one of my guests one time said, it's like the longest 18 inches in the world is the distance between your brain and your heart. And it's like, it's probably been said a few times, but it's an interesting point, because I can know in my brain I should do all these things. I can know in my brain I should not drink every single day if I want to be successful. But taking the action is really different. So I find with the ceremony, it makes me really, I feel like I need to take action. Now, what are those blind spots? My classic ones is thinking too short term, thinking too much with my ego, not thinking about the greater good of what I'm doing in all aspects, and not get caught up with the management of details. I find when I go short-term thinking, that everything goes out the window. Mm-hmm. So like I always try to think I call it my 100-year plan. I'm always thinking like, what is the right decision for 100 years from now? There's a church in Barcelona called the Sagrada Familia. And when Gaudi was building it, he said, I have a 100-year plan, right? And so he always said, my investor's not in a rush. And so in his lifetime, he built like one wall of this thing. And it's funny to see it now because you can see it being built, but like it was this one wall. And it was just like, what was this guy thinking? He was just thinking really long term. So I try, and I fail a lot of the times, most of the time, but I try to think, if I'm doing this for the next 100 years, then who cares if, we lose money this quarter, or who cares if you do this or make this mistake. I try, but but I don't know if I'll actually take the actions unless I get maybe a reminder. And maybe I'm wrong. Yeah. Maybe the ceremony won't teach me anything I won't know, but for me,
it'll blindside you with something else.
I know it's going to blindside me. And it's usually a really hard time for me. Usually it just shakes me, and it's really angry with me for not being more, I think maybe emotionally aware of what's happening around me, and focus on those things that are more important, and be more grateful, and be more of this. And I've had those realizations. I remember one time it was like I was thinking like, I have to do London Real. I got to do another episode. And then I think I had like a psilocybin experience, and it said, you get to do London Real. You idiot. You get to do London Real. It was just like, it was just a reframe. So I think somehow those tools can be powerful. Maybe for someone like me who just can't get the message through. I don't know. You're not buying it?
I don't know. No, I'm not. No, I'm like I said, I'm conflicted over it. I think, as I said in your show yesterday, I have plenty of friends who have benefited tremendously from it. I can't have an informed opinion about something that I don't have direct experience with. And I think it's appropriate for certain people. I'm not convinced that it's appropriate for everybody, because I think it is incredibly powerful, and I'm not sure that we really understand exactly what's going on. And you are opening your consciousness and your awareness to an energy that on some level is perhaps incomprehensible, and not everybody is prepared for that. What are you allowing into your unconscious mind? And if you've done enough work where you can handle it, then I think that's great. But I think there's some people who could end up really fractured as a result of that experience, and I know some people that have been.
Yeah.
So I think it's to be dealt with delicately and with caution.
Yeah, and I would
again,
agree with that.
that's my opinion based on no experience.
No experience, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would only just say that, like, you know, what we put into our unconscious mind every day is just shocking. You know, the things that we allow.
That's true.
And even you, as a guy who is really aware of, you know, what's, you know, good and bad and right and wrong, whatever, we constantly are dumping things into our subconscious every single day.
No question about it.
Via what we see, the frame, all the stories, and it's just amazing and shocking. So yeah, on that standpoint, this is potentially a different thought.
Yeah.
But I'm with you, and you know, John's like, look, you know, when you take intoxicants, you open yourself up to these different energies and spirits, and they can come in if you're not careful. And I do get all that too.
Yeah.
It's just I from my limited experience with these things, I realize that all of this stuff around us is almost just completely brain generated. And so it makes me not know whether to trust a lot of these assumptions that I'm sober and I'm taking it all in, I know what's what. Sometimes this thing gives me a different perspective, as it says, actually, you know, 90% of the stuff you're taking in every single minute of every single day is giving you kind of the wrong message.
Yeah, that's important and that's powerful.
Yeah.
You know, to change your frame. And I like that idea that you referenced earlier about, you know, that awareness that perhaps you think too short term, right? That we're so focused on what's directly in front of us, and we're on such a short, tight leash, like everything has to happen like this, and I got to get this post up, and then I'm doing this, and we're rushing around, and it's becoming increasingly more and more difficult to hit the pause button, to stop and reflect, to put distance between who you are and what you're doing and what is truly important. I told you before the show, last night I went to go see my friend Rob Bell do his show at Union Chapel. You got to check this guy out, he's amazing. But one of the things he was talking about that I thought was really profound is this difference between living in the treble notes, which is the ephemera, getting caught up in scrolling through our phones or getting through the day or whatever, and the bass notes. And what we're really lacking is our connection with the bass notes and what's really important. And we're only increasing the rapidity of this cycle that we live in. And I think it's taking more and more diligence and boundary erecting to connect with those bass notes and to really make sure that the work that we're doing is the right work, you know, the best investment of our time. That's going to move the ball forward professionally, but also in our personal development.
Yeah, and you and I are, you know, we're producing weekly episodes, so like we're contributing to this, you know, kind of.
And you're on this
thing,
like, well, maybe I should do 2 a week, and maybe I should, and like, what? Oh, well, now there's IGTV. What are we doing with that? Like, we gotta, you know, and it's like, no. What's important here?
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm the worst at that. I mean, I am very short-term focused to try to make all this stuff happen around here.
Yeah, and I plead guilty too.
Yeah, and so yeah, I talk about this 100-year plan, and we're always trying to do these things. And when we make these movies, you know, we make them because we feel like we need to. And so that's the one thing where I think we kind of take a pause and we take a step out, and it's not really part of the business. It's just something we think this message is important, and we go in my director and we want to make something that just like moves people and makes people think about something different. And that's a good time to kind of pause. But I couldn't agree with you more to get out of that treble. And maybe for me that ayahuasca is a way of connecting with those low notes somehow in a way that I can't hear them otherwise. And of course, as usual, I'll make a movie out of it and do that. And as twisted as that is, if it gets me to do it, then maybe it's okay. And so, and I wouldn't be going if I wasn't gonna make a movie about it. And so now it's gonna get me to go, and I'm looking forward to it, and I'm also gonna be terrified. But I do think I need just to check in and see how am I doing, you know, and if I need to be reminded and being pushed, okay, you know, you really are forgetting about this core value and this core value. You think you're doing it right, Brian, but you're actually not. You're just being, you know, they have a word in this country, I won't use it, but it's like a jerk. You know, you think you are, but you're being this guy. And I just want to make sure, I want to kind of check in, and maybe I'll get a different message, but I think I will be checking in, and I'll come back with a few lessons.
Yeah.
And again, I'm not, telling everyone they should do ayahuasca, but it's the one psychedelic that when I go to, I come back with a couple distinct lessons. I don't find that with DMT and psilocybin. I don't actually play with marijuana, so I don't know, but it's one that comes back and I got these things I got to do. So we'll see what happens.
Right.
Yeah.
So we have been talking for 2 hours and we have yet to utter the word vegan or Iron Man, really. You know what
yeah, you should do that.
So we got to land this plane soon, but you just did a half Ironman. You did it on a plant-based diet. You did it because our mutual friend John Joseph cornered you and challenged you, and you fulfilled that challenge by rising to the occasion. You adopted a plant-based diet, and you trained for this half Ironman, and you did it in a very compressed period of time. You went to Chattanooga. You were successful. You finished. This all begins and ends with John Joseph, the powerful John Joseph. And what's really cool, everybody should go and watch your Iron Mind series. You can, see the whole thing unfold. But what I love about this is that I had this inkling like, oh, this guy's doing this, but he's doing it to like make these movies. As soon as he finishes this half Ironman, he's gonna go back to eating what he was eating, and then he'll go back to jiu-jitsu and he'll forget about all the Ironman stuff. But what I've seen is you have gone all in. You're still like loving the plant-based diet and you're still getting out there and killing it. You went out and like on your own, not because your coach told you to, you went out and ran a marathon just on a Sunday afternoon or whatever it was, like just for fun. So it's been really cool to see you kind of grab this rope and continue to swing from it.
Yeah, well, it's great, kind of a great way to see it through your eyes, kind of what I was doing. But yeah, I mean, look, John Joseph is an incredible guy. We both know him pretty well, and he
changed my life.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Well, he came into my studio, and I get to meet 50, 60, 70 people a year, and the ones that make an impression on me, I kind of go back for more. And I think John, you need to experience him in person and a few times, and then you realize that there's a lot going on with John Joseph, and I got that impression right away. And so I do what I normally do. I start digging a little deeper. I read the books, and I do this and do that, and John really stayed in touch with me. And I've watched John now a lot over the last 4 or 5 months, and I've seen him, talk to other people at a dinner conversation, and he really knows what he's talking about. Really has thought through these ideas in a very long way. He's lived it. He's road tested these things, and he's a really wise guy, and also a lot of fun, and very opinionated, and also of service. That guy is always about service. So. It was amazing to do this project with him and to get challenged with him and also put me on the spot and push me to go back to these hard times in New York City. So that was incredible. And then the Ironman on top of it, training for that was intense. I mean, I love a good challenge, but it was amazing. I got so much respect for the people that put in the time, and I started liking these things. That endurance mindset, where you go in your brain. I think I really started enjoying it,
I'm interested in, you kind of come from the MMA world, doing jiu-jitsu for a long time, and typically you meet people that are either like super into the endurance thing, or they're like MMA people. It's not often that you meet people who kind of have experience in both. So what are the differences, and what do you think are what are the differences, not just physically, but the lessons that you learn?
Yeah. So part of my rebuilding process when I got to London was learning Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and that definitely had a huge part. And I trained for 8 years in a row, from 2002 to 10, and kept training, and boxing and Thai boxing and wrestling, but all anaerobic cardio, short bursts stuff. And then I would lift weights, and that was my thing. And it was martial arts, so I was fighting and dominating and that kind of thing. So, I happened to be introduced to Ido Portal and got into some different kind of movements and started playing a little bit of dance, and then I got massively introduced to endurance through this movie. And I just go in open-minded, trying to think, what can I learn from what these people are doing, and then get uncomfortable and do what they do, which is normally nothing like what I would do. I mean, again, a jiu-jitsu guy, you want to go on the mat and tap someone out and go hard and learn how to break someone's arm and then go home. I never thought, go out for 2 hours, 3 hours and run, what's that going to get me? Or swimming. People always have something to say about swimming. I'm not a good swimmer. It's all these stories in our head. And then cycling. I mean, gosh, And I had no experience that since I was a kid. So I learned so much. You know, each one has a different kind of a discipline, the tracking of it, the pushing through the stories you tell yourself in your head, whether it's a central governor theory or whatever. I mean, listening to the voices in my head that say, Brian, your knee hurts, you better stop. Your ankle hurts, you better stop. You didn't get enough nutrition. And like trying to battle those demons. I never had to do that in the jiu-jitsu world or even in the breakdancing world or the human movement world, because it's just this short burst stuff. You can eat a Snickers bar or you can eat a whatever, protein bar or something if you feel that. With this, it's a different game. You're in for this long haul, and it's a lot of planning. An engineer would love that. A lot of tracking.
The data. There's no end to the data in triathlon.
Yeah.
You should get a power meter, then you can really lose your mind.
For the bike, I haven't gone there yet. But at the same time, I fell in love with swimming, which is something I would have thought of just this repetitive, nonsensical exercise. I remember Mariana was like, why are you going back to swimming after the triathlon? I was like, I like it. It's just, it feels really weird. I feel super connected to the water. I work on little parts of my stroke every time I'm doing my hand right. And so I, thanks to the Ironman, I pushed through that resistance, because I think you have to do it straight for maybe 60 days. And now I find I love it. And I still love the running. I still love the cycling. And then with the diet, I'm going plant-based was a big move for me. I had done it like one meal a week before that. Been around people that did it, interviewed tons of people that did it, but I had no real reason to do it. And this made me do it, because like when you commit to John Joseph, you better effing do it, right? And so that was never an option, not to go back on that. But once I did it, and John showed me all of the options out there, and once Mariana started cooking, and I bought all the cookbooks, including yours, Plant Power Way, and all these others, we're like, wow, this is what food tastes like. Like, we fell in love with food. You think, wow, vegetables have these fascinating tastes. And so it was amazing. I had a great chef, and I felt better. And I didn't have an injury in 80 days. Doesn't make sense. I'm 47 years old. I should have tweaked an ankle or a knee or something, and it didn't happen. I feel great. And so I thought to myself, first of all, I'm not going to celebrate in Chattanooga with a steak and a beer in front of John Joseph.
He's not going to let you do that.
That was one thing. Also, another thing, which I actually haven't told anybody, but you're Richroll, so I'll tell you, is I actually stopped drinking on New Year's Eve of last year.
Oh, wow.
So I've actually been completely alcohol-free for the last 6 months.
That's awesome.
Longest time in my life, since I was 17 or 18.
What motivated that?
My drinking had been massively reduced, but still, it was like, let's have some wine here and there, and I just thought it was lazy, and it actually happened before the movie happened, and I just said to Mariana, I was like, why don't we stop drinking for 30 days, just do it, and she's like, okay, let's do it, and then we got to the 30 days, and she's like, let's have a drink, and I was like, no, let's not, and so I said, for me, it's just a test, it's just like, this thing has had now much limited power over me, but it's a way that you can quote unquote relax on the Friday, right? And I can handle it. It would never get out of hand. And I haven't touched hard alcohol in a long time. And you're like, yeah, Brian, I've heard all that before. But this, I was just like, I'm actually going to just make a choice. And so that it actually worked really perfectly with this training, because, if you're training every day. Right. And so, yeah, that's where I'm at. I'm at right now with 6 months. I don't know what's going to happen, if it's going to continue. But for me now it's a battle with myself. And now it's just like, well, why? And if I have a really hard day, it's just like, why? Why does this thing have power over you? And so now it's more of, why can't I not do it? And so that's what it's become. So, just so you know. And so with the plant-based...
It's great, man. Awesome.
Yeah, it's been pretty interesting.
Yeah,
so
you're sticking with the plant-based.
Yeah, and I'm sticking with the plant-based because for me, everything tastes good. So if I just make sure I get the right food in me, why not? And I'm feeling great. I'm feeling amazing. I want to keep feeling this way. So for me, having a little bit of discipline just gets me there. And I also feel great about everything else I'm doing, and not to mention the other things and the animals and the carbon footprint, which is all real. So I'm not protesting out in front of slaughterhouses yet, but I see where they're going, and I kind of like doing this.
We'll see where you're at after the ayahuasca trip.
Yeah, exactly. We'll see where I'm at. But so I've learned from you guys, from these paths, and so for me, it's been like an episode of London Real. I got to hang out for 80 days with a runner, a cyclist, a swimmer, a vegan, and be with them. And now I'm like, wow, I see all of these cool things about what you do, and I want to keep doing them. So that's me.
That's awesome, man.
Yeah.
Well, let's wrap this up. But maybe to end it, it would be great to, leave everybody with some thoughts on what it's all about. Like, as somebody who has really transformed their life in such a dramatic way and has had the experience of sitting and convening with so many amazing people and has intuited all of that into, real life changes. If you can kind of distill down one or two ideas that you could leave people with, because I think most people are they're just stuck a little bit. They're just looking to, a little relief, like a little bit more fulfillment and purpose in their lives. And just getting people to take that first step is tough.
Yeah, it's very tough. I've been in a really unique situation. So again, like 7 years, and I got to have about 500 of these conversations. And and again, I'm a non-religious MIT engineer. I'm a little cynical about this and that. I never believed in spirituality and higher powers and all that stuff until I started broadcasting. And after a while, I started getting like sometimes the same message from people of all of these different backgrounds. And it would all kind of come down to this kind of similar theme at the end. And once it happened once or twice, I was like, okay, but like 7, 8, 9, 10, 15, 20 times. At the end of a lot of my talks, people are basically saying sometimes to me a very similar message, which might sound weird for me to say it, but it's this. It's that, we are all one. And that's the message I keep getting from all these people in all these different lifestyles. And so I'm still trying to understand it. But, and again, from my scientific mind, it doesn't make sense. But I feel like we're all of these humans in this world, we're linked more than we think we are. And that when you see that person across the street that just did a horrible thing or cut you off in traffic and you want to yell at him, and you're like, that guy's me too? And it's like, yeah, that guy's you too. And so I feel, for me personally, the sooner I locked into investing back in my own organism, which is humanity, everything started going the right way for me, and I got it. And so I always try to think of that one principle, because that's all any London Real show ever comes down to, is that there's something going on here, folks. We haven't figured it out. Some people say be of service, which is another way of saying, protect this whole organism, or pay it forward, or try to help the next person, or let's try to lift everyone up to the next level. And every time I do that or see people do that, it feels like we're all advancing. And so for me, it's been therapy, because my default is to do the opposite of doing that. And so I'm always trying to get that message out there more of, whenever you're in a situation where you're anxious or you're worried about something, usually it's because it's the ego has got involved more than it should. And you're worried about my performance or my promotion or my bank account. And I find as soon as you take it out and just think about the other people that will benefit from your action, then everything just becomes smoother and easier. And I just start resonating and I make the right choices. So like with Iron Mind Race, like I filmed it and I could have totally crashed and burned that day. But I felt like the whole process of me doing that was just going to be the lesson that was going to be out there for everyone to do. And so I didn't actually feel nervous that day. I was just like, let's go be myself. And so I would just say to the Brian out there who hasn't been able to learn all of this stuff back in his 20s and 30s, it's just that, what you're doing now in this kind of egoic realm isn't really working out. Even when you get that thing, you're like, I don't know really what's next. And so, realize that's a data point and try to think to yourself, okay, what else can I do? What are some of these other things I can do? And most likely the ones that are going to make you feel good are going to be the ones that advance other people along, that make their lives better somehow. And so it's counterintuitive in our zero-sum game mentality, but ultimately there's no question that that's true. Yeah. Good talking to you, man. Good talking to you too. Thank you, Richroll. This is great. You're a legend. This concludes like 7 or 8 hours of us sitting across from each other talking. Do you still like me? Yeah. How are you feeling? Are you all right? Yeah. I feel like we're just getting started. I think we did pretty good, man. Yeah. Cool. So if you're digging on Brian, he's easy to find on the internet. You can just Google his name, but
Subscribe to London Real on YouTube. Subscribe on Apple Podcasts or Google Podcasts, wherever you listen to shows. And you're just at London Real on all the social media, right?
At London Real TV.
At London Real TV. Cool. All right, thanks, my friend.
Rich.
Let me know next time you come to LA.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I'd love to see your place there. And again, just want to thank you for everything you're doing. And thanks for being part of the series. It was really special for me. I got a little nervous talking to you that day. So no, I really appreciate that. Just thinking about you and the vibes was an important part. And yeah, I just love watching you becoming the you of today, and I'm looking forward to what's happening in the next few years. So thanks for doing what you do.
I appreciate that. Much love, my brother.
Cool, man.
Until next time.
All right.
Cool.